Uh, who's checking the questions on YouTube? Is somebody checking?
Ma'am, myself and Reem will be there today for the entire day.
Okay, because I wouldn't know if there are any questions posted on the YouTube. So how are we?
They will pass on the questions to you, Srivani.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Yeah.
Welcome, Srivani. Hi.
Thank you, Kokila.
We'll begin our session in a few minutes.
Okay. Is this order right? Anchal, Dhananjay, Punya, and Rohit.
Abhijit,
Yes,
you
ma'am.
have to tell.
Yes, ma'am.
Abhijit, that is the right order, right?
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
I think Abhijit, you can begin.
Four more minutes now.
not at 10.
Yes, 4 more minutes.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay,
Great.
okay.
You know, this is, the sessions are right on dot, or even, everybody is
Yeah,
ready
yeah.
much before the session is beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's amazing.
I think that is the advantage of online.
Yes, yes.
It is physical, people have to come and all, it takes time.
Hello.
On the felicitation ceremony. Felicitation ceremony, huh? Felicitation. Again, welcome. Who will start? For the felicitation ceremony.
Shall we begin?
Yes, Abhijit.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Department of Translation Studies, the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, I, Abhijit Darve, a PhD scholar at the Department of Translation Studies, welcome all our guests and participants who have joined us virtually for the 9th session of the 4-day online international seminar titled Translation as a Reconstitution, Issues of Self-Canon, History and Memory in India, which is organized by the Department of Translation Studies, the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. It is my privilege to introduce Dr. T. Srivani, who will be the chair for the 9th session titled Translation, Culture and Untranslatability. Dr. T. Srivani is a professor at the Department of Hispanic and Italian Studies in the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Professor T. Srivani holds a doctorate in Latin American Literature and Translation Studies. She is a gold medalist in linguistics from the Osmania University and later acquired masters in Spanish from Delhi University. Professor Srivani has been teaching Spanish language and literature for more than 2 decades in the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Her interests include pedagogy and translation studies. Currently, she is the Dean of Foreign Students and the head of the Department of Hispanic and Italian Studies in the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Apart from teaching and holding key administrative posts, Dr. Srivani is also a translator and has translated Spanish short stories to Telugu and vice versa. She has also presented papers in several national and international conferences. Dr. Srivani has produced e-content in Spanish for the NME ICT UGC. She was also the part of the core team of EPG Pathshala for Spanish, and she is also offering a MOOC proficiency course in Spanish on SWAM UGC. Also, Dr. Srivani was bestowed with Spanish government scholarship twice to attend teacher training program and to do research in Spain. With the conclusion of this brief introduction, now I invite Professor T. Srivani to kindly chair the session. Also, I humbly request our chair to kindly inform the presenters to stick to the time limit, that is 20 minutes. With this, I conclude. Thank you, everyone. Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning. A very warm morning to all of you. Thank you, Abhijit, for those kind words. And first of all, I would like to congratulate the Department of Translation Studies for such a wonderful conference that they have organized, and today is the last day. And the scholars are doing a great job. And thank you, Professor Tarakeshwar, for inviting me to be on the chair. Had it been on campus, it would have been a festive atmosphere with so many scholars, paper presenters, plenary speakers. But however, I think because it's an online program, people from several places across the world are able to also watch it on YouTube. So without much more in detail, I would like to begin the session. Today's session is on translation, culture and untranslatability, and such a very important session, especially in the field of translation studies. Culture and untranslatability, these are two important terms that have been discussed on several platforms. Today's session, we have 4 presenters. We begin with Dr. Anchal Dahiya, and she's going to speak on translation of culture, a study of Habib Tanveer's Kamdev Ka Apna Basant Ritu Ka Sapna. Dr. Anchal Dahiya is assistant professor at Gurugram University, New Delhi. Dr. Anchal, over to you. Please stick to 20 minutes. Over to you, Anchal.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for providing me the opportunity. So I'll straight away begin with my presentation here. Am I visible and audible?
Yes, you're visible as well as audible. Please go ahead.
The title of my research paper is Translation of Culture, a study of Habib Tanveer's Kam Dev Ka Apna, Basant Ritu Ka Sapna. So this text by Habib Tanveer, it's a translation of Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. So translation in its true essence carries forward the cultural discourse from one chronotope to another. A quality translation maintains a fine balance between the original text and a successful dispersal of meaning through the translated text. One of the major prerequisites for translation of a text is 2 languages and presumably 2 different cultures as well. The time and space which divides the original text from the translated text determines the amount of loss that may occur in the process of translation. Loss of certain culture-specific items from the original text may not always be detrimental to the meaning produced, as there is a simultaneous gain of culture-specific items as well. One of the major predicaments of translator is finding an equivalence of a culturine, that is, a culture-specific item. A culturine contains critical information on one specific cultural background, which may not have any equivalence in the target language. In this case, it is pertinent that the translator focuses upon the transference of larger meaning in the language of the target audience. According to Venuti, I quote, "The aim of translation is to bring back a culture other as the same, the recognizable, even the familiar, and this aim always risks a wholesale domestication of the foreign text, often in a highly self-conscious projects where translation serves an appropriation of foreign cultures for domestic agendas, cultures, economic and political. On one hand, translation allows relatable identities to be formed for foreign cultures, but on the other hand, translation ensures cultural dominance of the target audience, thereby undermining the sanctity of the original text. The research paper will provide a comprehensive study of Habib Tanveer's Kam Dev Ka Apna, Basant Ritu Ka Sapna, which is a translation of Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, like I've already said. The paper will delve into the cultural nuances that be translated from a Renaissance text to a Hindi and Bhojpuri text. Now, Walter Lander, an English writer and poet of the 19th century, claimed that Shakespeare is a poet of the world, and rightly so. The universal appeal of Shakespeare's plays and the post-colonial sensibilities of the Indian audience have resulted in numerous translations of Shakespeare plays in regional Indian languages. For instance, Haran Chandra Rakshit's translation of Shakespeare's works in Bengali, Sambad Mudaliar's Tamil adaptations of Macbeth and Hamlet, A. Madhaviya's adaptation of Othello, the Assamese version of Comedy of Errors, Romeo Juliet, Cymbeline, and many others. Even Indian cinema has adapted various plays by Shakespeare in Indian cultural milieu. For instance, Omkara by Vishal Bhardwaj is an adaptation of Othello, Makbul is based on Macbeth, Heather is based on Hamlet, etc. Now, Kam Dev Ka Apna, Basant Ritu Ka Sapna was first performed in 1993 at the British Council Garden in Delhi by his theatre company called Naya Theatre. Habib Tanveer has molded a Renaissance text in the Indian cultural framework. He has ensured that the meaning of text has shifted across cultural boundaries. The process of translation of a text has occurred at many levels. Tanveer has successfully translated an English play from the Renaissance era into a post-colonial Indian milieu. Anjum Katyal, in the introduction of her book Habib Tanveer Towards an Inclusive Theatre, clearly states that Kam Dev is a translation, not an adaptation. She remarks, translation, as we know, is the process of shifting meaning across cultural boundaries, and it can raise, often in very urgent ways, questions of interpretation and meaning, even destabilizing assumptions of originals within literary hierarchies. In an adaptation, which Kam Dev, I believe, is not, one text is absorbed into another with no trace or residue visible. Kam Dev, on the other hand, is a palimpsest where the original is visible under the overwriting. Habib Tanveer also insists that it is not an adaptation because the names and the characteristics of various characters remain the same. The translation of meanings across time and space and between cultures and languages is a Herculean task which has been smoothly taken up by Habib Tanveer. Addition of culture-specific items from the target language requires enough skill and knowledge on the part of translator. Tanveer successfully added cultural nuances from Indian and specifically Bhojpuri culture. At the same time, the genius of Shakespeare can also be clearly recognized from the translated text. The title itself suggests deep cultural nuances that embellish Shakespearean play. Midsummer Nights holds significance for the Christian culture, as Midsummer Day is designated as a feast day for the martyr Saint John. The celebrations of Midsummer, that is a summer solstice, represented typical celebration of the longest day. Indian culture, on the other hand, does not have a direct counter, as the summers in India are very well known to be extreme. The closest comparison that can be made will be the celebration of spring. There are various festivals which celebrate spring in India. For instance, Basant Panchami, Baisakhi, etc. Also, Kamdev is the Hindu god of love and desire. The aforementioned themes of love and desire are very prominent in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. Although Tanveer has left out certain characters like Hermia and Helena to suit the needs of translation, yet themes of love and desire represented by these characters are carried forward in the translation. Tanveer very proficiently translated an entire foreign concept in Indian context in such a manner that one does not have any knowledge of Shakespeare one does not need to have any knowledge of Shakespeare or his works in order to enjoy the translated work. Tanveer's Naya theatre is a beautiful amalgamation of folk tradition and modern techniques. His understanding of modern European theatre with folk and traditional elements gave birth to the masterpieces like Charan Das Chor, Agra Bazaar, Mor Naam Damad, Gaon Ka Naam Sasural, etc. His plays form a perspicacious blend of traditional, modern, folk, Western, indigenous, urban, and rural elements. The success of his plays commanded audience in tribal areas, villages, towns, as well as cities in India and across the globe. For Habib, his production was about different kinds of speech, different kinds of poetry, and different kinds of people within the same milieu. Language, culture, and translation are inevitably linked. Newmark stipulates culture as, I quote, the way of life and its manifestation to use a particular language as its means of expression, unquote. The text allows us to examine interrelationship between language and culture and the manner in which it affects culture. There are many concepts in English which do not have an equivalent in Indian culture and vice versa. All the plays by Tanveer use language as a universal tool. Language has always been fascinated by, Tanveer has always been fascinated by language as a tool, especially the language of common man. He had been introduced to Chhattisgarhi dialect at a very early age. This had a huge impact on many of his works. His association with villagers from Chhattisgarh, as well as his European experiences of theatre, expanded his worldview multifolds. He aimed to transcend language barrier in his plays so that a play in Chhattisgarhi dialect can be appreciated by English audience as well as the audience from the villages. I quote, Tanveer did not just lift the language and use it to write dialogue, just as he did not just lift folk material and fashion plays from it. He worked with folk actors who embodied language and brought an oral performative tradition with them. The translation Kamdev owes a great deal to Tanveer's actors as he encouraged improvisation by the characters. In the play, the villagers like Bottom and Quince speak in Chhattisgarhi dialect, while Theseus, Hippolyta, and Puck and Fairies speak in Hindi. This creates a demarcation between the refined in the society and the mechanics from a rural background. Shakespeare also marked a difference in the social background of his characters using similar techniques. Despite language barriers of the local Chhattisgarhi actors in his plays, he managed to penetrate the psyches of all types of audience. Tanveer's Naya theatre also constitutes the amalgamation of Western ideas with Brecht and Marx with traditional folk elements like Nach being played by rural Chhattisgarhi people in front of an audience, which ranges from villages to international theatre festivals. Later on, Pandavani, a folk ballad form was also included in his plays. Songs are an intricate part of Indian culture. We have folk songs to mark each and every event of our lives. Our regional languages and dialects are rich in folk songs, which add a unique flavor to our lives. Not only was Tanvir inspired by Brecht in terms of these fundamental ideas and techniques like alienation effects, minimalistic stage props, but the use of songs as an integral part of a play was something that Tanvir picked up from his Brechtian influence. One of the reasons why Tanvir chose this play by Shakespeare was the richness of songs and meters in the text. He remarks, I quote, my understanding of it was that this is a most fragile comedy. This has got a scheme in terms of meter, variety of meter and verses, which is intricate. Tanvir has not translated the songs blatantly, rather he's provided an Indian flavor to the songs of fairies. For instance, the phrase spotted snakes with double tongue in the original text has been translated as Chintedar Pitpiti. Although he was very well aware of the dangers of taking up a text with a variety of meters and verses, as he states, I quote, seemingly it looks very light and nice, but it is intimidating, and rightly so. But he has done justice to the songs and verses. Various songs in the play have been very skillfully translated into Chhattisgarhi to suit the demands of Indian audience. Hence, Habib Tanvir's works with the ordinariness of the theatre making, derived from the popular forms of Chhattisgarh, he attempts to revalue the commonplace that is, and the artwork that is grafted within it. The workday and familiar become remarkable and strange once their taken for grantedness is disrupted by transfer to literary and performative spaces into other and new narratives and stories. Various cultures have their own way of accepting translations. Tanvir's translation of A Midsummer Night's Dream transcends the boundaries of language and culture and has been applauded with similar enthusiasm throughout the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Anchal. You're well before time. Thank you for that presentation about how Habib Tanvir's play adapted, from the Midsummer Night's Dream of Shakespeare, which he has taken to the rural masses and has presented in the local languages and,
musical actors as well.
Yeah, local actors. Thank you so much. Shall we now move to the next speaker? I think we'll finish all the presentations and then take the questions. The next speaker is, I invite Mr. Dhananjay Kumar Tiwari. Mr. Dhananjay, are you there? Right. Good morning, Mr.
Yes.
Dhananjay. Dhananjay Kumar Tiwari is going to present on untranslatability of legal salutations and analytical study. Dhananjay is a doctoral fellow at the DAIC, Department of Linguistics, Banaras Hindu University. Dhananjay, over to you.
Yes. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you're very much audible. Please go
on. Okay. My topic of my article is untranslatability of legal salutations and analytical study. Is it shareable?
Yes.
Is it visible?
Yeah,
okay.
we can see your screen. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you may have to reduce the size because it is can you reduce it a little of your
how can I reduce, ma'am?
Yeah, it's okay, you go ahead. But you can start, Dhananjay.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. My topic is untranslatability of legal salutations and analytical study. A legal translation is the process of transferring legal messages from one language to another language, preserving the equivalence. And it is not merely the semantic equivalence that needs to be maintained, but also it is very much important to transfer legislative and judicial intention needs to be kept constant. Legal translation is a specialized area of translation that requires expertise in linguistic skills as well as in legal skills. And it is noticed that some legal cognates are left untranslated in target language as they are in source language. For instance, English legal salutations like my lord, my lord, your lordship, your honor, and sir are not translated in target language, like you can see in Hindi. The effort of translating some legal cognates, like legal salutations and some maxims of French, some maxims of Latin, results in losing their semantic significance. Consequently, the translated text fails to achieve suitable equivalence. Thus, there is a need to adopt a method of direct cognate transfer in target text. You can find direct cognate transfer in translated text. I am talking about legal translation. So the major concern of this study is to highlight the issues of equivalence in legal salutary words during legal translation. And the current investigation is aimed at determining the causes of legal cognates untransferability. The study involves the collection of few legal cognates for salutations and the study and their origin and development. The limitation of this study has focused on only salutary words which are used in English and Hindi. So let me show some legal cognates and their origin and their translation. The word like my lord or me lord, you always listen my lord, me lord during the argument of lawyers. The Hindi equivalence of my lord is mere nath, dharam murti, mere bhagwan, nyay murti. But these all Hindi equivalent are not really equivalent of my lord or me lord. And let me explain the origin of this word my lord. It was borrowed from Middle French milord or milor, which stands for noble or rich man, generally used by servants in respect of their masters, but it is currently used by lawyers in the honor of judges. Another word, my lady. The Hindi equivalent of my lady is Meri Hamdam. I have taken it from Google. Meri Hamdam, Meri Aurat, Meri Mahila. Is it real equivalence? My lady and Meri Aurat? My lady and Meri Mahila? I think no. So this word, my lady, was derived with the a French term, milady, which refers to a courteous mode, a salutation used by servants to refer the lady of house or high-ranking women. But nowadays, female judges or female lawyers, senior lawyers, are saluted with this term, my lady. But in India, it is very rare because the females are in legal profession are very less in number. Another word, your honor. The Hindi equivalent of your honor is Judge Sahab or Aapka Samman. Judge Sahab or Aapka Samman. This is not a proper equivalence. And your honor was formal address for someone with the title like knight, baron in the age of Elizabeth. But today it is used for judges. The same other word is your worship. The Hindi equivalent is Aapki Puja, Aapki Kripa. This is also not the real equivalence. Okay, next. Like your lordship, Aapka Adhipatya and your lordship are not equally equivalent. Your lordship is used for the salutation of judges. Frequently, lawyers use your lordship, his lordship, your majesty. The Hindi equivalent is Maharaj. Honorable sir, Mananiya Mahoday. This is also superfluous. Mananiye, Mahoday. Mahoday and Mananiye. Both are two terms and both are salutations. So no need to say Mananiye, Mahoday. Mananiye is enough. Honorable Madam, Mananiye Mahodaya. Okay. And some Hindi legal salutations like Hujur, ya Hajur. And I didn't find any English equivalent word Hajur ya Hujur. And the second was it Sarkar. Generally, people from village sides use Sarkar, Ji Sarkar, Ha Sarkar. And the English equivalent is government. That is totally untranslatable. It is not real proper equivalence. Sriman, English equivalent is sir. Malik is also, the term Malik is also used to address Malik, Ji Malik, Ha Malik. And I found English equivalent, Malik means master and boss. Mahoday, sir. So these are the salutations used in Indian legal system or British English. The salutations from legal English is used in British legal system and Indian legal system. So I am going to show the reason of these issues of equivalence. Why untranslatability in legal texts are found. The first reason is religious myth. Religious beliefs are profoundly embedded in legal language. Religion and justice are intimately connected. Example, for well over a millennium after it went out, the Roman Catholic Church stuck to Latin as the language of religion. Similarly, Jews have kept Hebrew and Hindus had kept Sanskrit as a sacred language. Religious as well with legal language always traces the issues of credibility and purity in translated texts. Some famous translated texts have experienced the protest in the name of purity and religion faith. The Bible for Christianity, the Quran for Islam, and the Vedas for Hindus are the real sources of personal law, are the real sources of law. And all those are sacred texts do have particular source language like Vedas, Sanskrit, Hebrew, Bible, Hebrew. So Quran, the Arabic, they are the real, the source language. And when Martin Luther, a German priest, tried to translate Bible in common language, in the language of people, he had to face protest. And Protestants opposed with the argument that every word is in the Bible was dictated by God himself. Each syllable is holy. Translating into another language would lose its significance or minimize its reality. Although this may be the symbol of conservatism, but it can't be ignored. I am asking a question. Will a priest be permitted to chant Vedic mantra in Hindi? Will anybody allow a priest to chant Vedic mantra in Hindi or in Bhojpuri? I think no. So first, legal text face the issues, legal translated text faces the issues of credibility. The another reason I found, the persuasive definition and interpretation of legal concept. It has been observed that definition of key lexical terms and key legal cognates are mostly persuasive. Legal drafters maintain the legislative intention in the definition of legal terms during the enactment of a statute. For instance, the equivalence term person in Hindi is Vyakti, but legal person is also available in legal system like company, like institution, river. So many concepts are equivalent with the person. And another reason is authoritarian definition of legal terminology. The archaic legal terms have acquired authoritative interpretations over the years. Translating or rewriting them is a type of effort to break the trend, which invites many difficulties. So law professionals adopt the safest and easiest way of interpretation they go for previous decision or they go for direct cognate transfer. I am concluding. Legal salutations are socio-historical and cultural product of nation, and their translation from one culture to another culture carries the possibility of improper equivalence. But it doesn't mean the translation of legal text is not possible. If translators understand the legislative and judicial intention, they may translate by maintaining the proper equivalence while transforming legal concept in other legal system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhananjay. You have your paper was quite brief,
Yes.
and you have explained to us the problems in translating legal terms,
Yes.
which we especially with respect to salutations into Hindi basically, and
Yes.
these terms that are in use are from the colonial period, and we continue to do so, and the problems in translating these terms to vernacular languages. I think we will go in for discussion and taking questions after the other two presenters. I think we are going quite, we may finish the session quite early, but let me now call upon the third speaker today, Dr. Punya Prakash Tripati. Dr. Punya Prakash Tripati, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'm very much
okay. Yeah, good morning. Dr. Punya Prakash Tripati is going to present on translation from Italian to Hindi, issues and resolutions. He is doing currently he's doing PhD in Italian Studies, Department of Germanic Studies, University of Delhi. So over to you, Dr. You're still pursuing.
Not still, doctor.
Yeah, you're
Thank
still
you,
pursuing. All the best, Mr. Punya Prakash Tripati.
Thank you very much, ma'am, and good morning to everyone, to all of you. And I am very thankful to the Department of Translation Studies, EFLU, for giving me this opportunity to present my paper. In fact, to be frankly speaking, the very first paper that I'll be presenting. So, okay, so I'll start. Okay, so I'll begin. Translating a text is always a complex and painstaking process, especially when one deals with two languages which are geographically and culturally very distant from each other. Therefore, translating from European language to Indian language is comparatively much more arduous than crossing over among Indian languages. Nonetheless, there is a plethora of Western literature translated in Hindi and other Indian languages, and many Indian literary works are also available in various foreign languages. There exists a great amount of translated works between Indian and European languages like French, German, Spanish, as far as the, and so on and so forth. As far as the literary translations between Italian and Indian languages is concerned, prominent writings of English authors of Indian origin, such as Salman Rushdie, Arundhati Roy, Amitabh Ghosh, Vikram Seth, etc., are already present in Italian translations. Moreover, eminent Hindi writers such as Premchand, Mohan Rakesh, Nirmal Verma, and Mukti Bodh, etc., have also been rendered into Italian. Though it's too difficult to find those translations even in Italy in bookshops. On the contrary, the number of literary translations directly from Italian to Hindi can literally be counted on fingertips. For instance, two famous works translated in Hindi are Notturno Indiano, di Antonio Tabucchi by K.C. Datta as Raat ke Aine mein, and Il Deserto di Tartari as Tatari Viran by Ghansham Sarma. This next novel was by Dino Buzzati, a very famous Italian writer. And there may be a few more, but just few, I guess, one or two more directly translated from Italian to Hindi. As far as the case of research work is concerned, only 2 research works in this direction have been undertaken so far. I mean, the little knowledge that I have, and I tried to find out. So on the basis of that, I am saying this. So one is by Mr. Rakesh Kumar, and the other is by myself. I did, and this paper is actually has come out of that experience only. So we both took this research work at MPhil level. So now this is the reason why, as a research scholar of Italian language, I decided to engage with the translation of Italian literature in Hindi. The current paper is actually based on my MPhil thesis, for which I translated the 2 short stories of Alberto Moravia, titled Gli Amici Senza Soldi, that is roughly translated in English is Friends Without Money, and La Concorrenza, that would be the competition. And then I analyzed the challenges faced. Of course, no, in such a short span of time, it is not possible to talk about all the issues, but some important issues I will like to shed light on. Then currently for my PhD thesis as well, I have chosen to translate Italo Calvino as I Visconti di Mezzato, that is the Cloven Viscount in Hindi. And then I'll go to yes, these 2 stories are part of a collection of short stories entitled I Racconti Romani, that is Roman Tales, published by Alberto Moravia in the year 1954. All the stories are narrated in the first person, and they are set in post-war Rome, after Second World War. All the characters belong to classe proletaria, that is the proletariat, and have aspirations to live a dignified life. Moravia has brilliantly underlined the misery they are going through in their quotidian life. Now, talking in brief about these 2 stories, the drama, as we call it. So, Gli Amici Senza Soldi is the story of Gigi, who lives with her mother. He spends most of his time with his friends in a bar located in Piazza Mastai, that is the square. After it is discovered that he has got pneumonia, his doctor asks him to spend a month near a beach, and for this he requires 30,000 lire, which he doesn't have. In order to borrow that amount, he goes to his friends, convinced of the fact that they would lend him, but none of them helped him. On the contrary, they don't hesitate to make fun of him. Following this, he returns home disappointed and is utterly surprised when he finds out that the mother has already arranged that amount. Now about the other story, La Concorrenza, the competition, is the story of another young man who, upon the death of his father, takes a cart filled with olives, oranges, and other items to sell them out. Initially, his business runs well, but after some time, sometimes 2 women, a mother and her daughter, come to the same area with the same products to sell. Since the mother was brilliant at tricks, the consumers of the protagonist start buying products from those 2 women. All this makes the protagonist, whose name is not mentioned in the story, makes him very furious and jealous. Also because the mother gives him a triumphant look. Once a young man with the woman comes to his cart, and while he is deciding what to buy, he happens to see Eunice, the daughter, mother and daughter together. So the daughter, he goes straight away to their cart. He stops buying from him. At this, the protagonist goes and threatens the young man, following which the guards come and inquire about the incident. Eunice, the daughter, saves him by hiding the truth. This act of Eunice makes him fall in love with her, and he confesses, and she too responds positively. The very next day, when he goes to meet her at a breeze and tries to touch and kiss her, he receives a cold response. He asks the reason, and she tells that he should be polite and not aggressive. One evening, he happens to discover that she is dating a butcher, macellaio in Italian. So next morning, he goes to the cart of the mother and asks her 1 etto, that is 100 grams of olives. And while she is weighing it, he asks her to be honest with the weight, and a verbal fight follows soon after. Having seen this, the butcher comes in and they start fighting. The protagonist takes the butcher's knife and tries to kill him, but somehow he is saved. The protagonist is arrested, and after months, when he is set free, his grandfather advises him to not use knife even when he sells them. So even if he is selling them. Now, coming directly to the issues of translations. So I'll like translation of proper nouns. I like to talk about this in brief. Like cities like Rome and Venice and Milan, we have been using it in Hindi for a very long time now. But as a translator, the problem was since these are proper nouns, and normally proper nouns are kept intact in the translation. So my problem was whether to use Rome, Venice, or Milan in Hindi, or to use the Italian pronunciation of Rome, that is Roma, or Venezia. Venice is Venezia in Italian, and then Milano, which is in Italian, that is Milano. So I choose to go away with this Rome, Milan, and Venice because obviously the Hindi readership is well aware with these terms. So maybe I can get suggestions on that as well. Okay, now taking a closer look at some other Italian nouns which entered English diction in just transliterated form and eventually borrowed by Hindi speakers. What we find is that they are divorced with their original Italian utterance in English and therefore also in Hindi. For instance, broccoli. Broccoli, we often pronounce it as broccoli, but in Italian the sound is broccoli. And similarly, cappuccino. English people or we also happen to use as cappuccino, pronounce it as cappuccino, but the correct pronunciation is cappuccino. So these are a few things. So I was saying that English here has a major role to play in the translation of Italian nouns in Hindi, the nouns which Indian readership or the Hindi readership is already familiar with. Then specifically talking about these two stories, there are terms like via. Via is a street in Italy, or corso is also used for a larger street in Italy. So Via di Parione, that's name of a street in Rome. Corso Vittorio. Now I retained this Via and Corso, though we can translate them in Hindi, but then it would be something like disassociating Shanti Path from Shanti from Path. So they are so, they are used together. So it's difficult to, according to me, I believed it was difficult to say Parione Gali or Vittorio Marg. So I tried to retain this Corso and Via. Then coming back to this personal pronouns. In Italian, we have 6 personal pronouns. I'll just show that as well. So in the story of La Concorrenza, the other story, what happens is the young man, when he talks to his grandfather, it's a story about the young man and the grandfather, and also Eunice, the mother and the daughter, because he was selling those things. So he all the time he uses tu. When he addresses his grandfather, tu. Though Italian has a pronoun, personal pronoun lei, which means up. as for the respect, the pronoun that we use in Hindi as well. But since this is Italian society, in Italian society, people use tu only. They don't use ap with their grandfather, with father, with mother. Doesn't matter who that person is. If that person is a family member, they would use tu, that is tum. So now the challenge was whether to be faithful to the source text or to use this ap. So I chose to use ap. I mean, in a way to appropriate it and to adapt it to as per the Indian culture. So to show the respect towards Indian culture, also because maybe the reader would find it very, would get baffled at this thing. So I did that, and then okay. So I decided to take the text towards the readers, taking text towards the readers in this case. Then okay, now culture specific terms, translation of culture specific terms. So languages don't exist in isolation. It is always embedded in the society, and therefore it always carries the cultural milieu of that societal space. So without acknowledging the context of the terms uttered, we can't really have access to the correct meaning. Julian House has rightly pointed out, language is culturally embedded. It serves to express and shape cultural reality, and the meaning of linguistic units can only be understood when considered together with the cultural contexts in which they are used. In translation, therefore, not only two languages, but also two cultures come into contact. In this sense, then translation is a form of intercultural communication. Now, terms representing cultural specificity and distinctiveness of a society make it very difficult for translators to find their closest correspondences in another language used in a different society. So much so that sometimes they are just untranslatable. To address the issue of untranslatability, the two main strategies that are put into practice are foreignization and domestication, both formulated and discussed at length by Lawrence Benuti. While the foreignization aims at retaining the cultural specific terms of original text by transliterating them, domesticating a strategy includes eliminating and substituting them with those representing the culture and tradition of the receivers, the receptors. Hence, while the first approach makes target readers aware of the source culture, the domesticating approach hides the fact from the target audience that they are reading a translation. So the whole question of visibility. I believe if translation is termed as an intercultural communication, it must give a space to what is exotic and alien to the target readers. In today's world of increased mobility, physical or digital, there should not be any reluctance to acknowledge and accommodate the other in our translation. This should ensure plurality and hybridity in the translated text, unlike domestication, which seeks to homogenize it. However, too much of foreignization can make the translated text devoid of the impact it would otherwise create, and it can also take away the pleasure of reading from the target readers. Therefore, as a translator of the two stories, I endeavored to strike a balance between the two stories in order to translate the terms laced with the cultural references of Italy. I would also like to add that there are instances when, despite having direct Hindi equivalents of some Italian terms, I had to resort to the foreignizing technique. Moreover, with foreignization, I don't at all mean to state that I have tried to retain the linguistic structure of the original text, which Venuti highlights. But because it's not possible, in being Hindi and Italian being very different languages. Okay, now okay, let's start. Ciao. So ciao is an Italian greeting and is used at the time of both meeting and departure. Coming back to cultural issues, exactly the way namaste is used in Indian context. However, the distinctive feature of ciao is that its usage is limited only to informal setting, while namaste is used to greet someone in both formal and informal setting. So despite this significant difference, some tend to use namaste as Hindi equivalent of ciao. Even in the dictionary, there is one Italian Hindi dictionary where we find this equivalent. but I have retained it in Devanagari transliteration as ciao, so that the readers are aware of the specific Italian greeting. Moreover, domesticating this term as namaste would have also eliminated the difference of gestures associated with the two greetings. Another word that I foreignized is piazza naona. Now, piazza in English is, of course, square. Since naona is a proper noun, its transliteration does not need any explanation. But the word piazza does have an equivalent in English, that is a square, which in Hindi becomes chowk or choraha. But if we look carefully, piazza in Italy is entirely a different space from what chalk represents in India. It is not only a physical urban space, but also social, cultural, and political as well, in the sense that it is a site of social gathering, festival, and demonstration. Hence, chalk is different. Uh, is similar neither in terms or nor in meaning to piazza. The other term I found is lira. So lira was the unit of Italian currency till 2002 when Italy became part of the European Union. And so retaining it would help the Hindi readership make a sense of time in which the story was located. In the same way, centesimo, that in English, of course, is cent, but which literally means the hundredth part of something, refers to the 100th part of Italian lira. It is used as so the English equivalent is cent, but I chose to retain the same Italian term in my translation, as while roaming around and buying things in Italy, one can't do away with this term, euro and centesimo. Hence, I transliterated and foreignized this term as well. Now, in the other story, La Concorrenza, the competition, other units are there. Etto, I read in the while I was talking of this story. Etto is like 100 gram. It is a unit of weight measurement in Italy, which in English means 100 grams. As a translation, one can, of course, translate the English meaning of the said term, that is 100 gram, 100 grams. But here also, I wanted to make our readership aware of this unit. Another word that is important to take into consideration is mamma. Every time the protagonist of the first story, Liamichi Senza Soldi, Friends Without Money, addresses his mother, he calls her Mamma. We all know that kinship terms are very rooted in a particular society and they don't have an equivalent. Therefore, I refrained from translating it as Ma or Mummy. Rather, I decided to make the Hindi readership aware of this important information, translating it as Mamma. Nonno, another kinship term, which can be Baba or Nana both, Dada or Nana. So there also, whenever the protagonist is talking to his grandfather, on those occasions, I retained this Italian term nonno as well. But when we have third, when the narrator is talking about nonno, on those occasions, I translated it as Dada. Then another word was carabinieri. The next story, the competition, has a reference to carabinieri, a term used to refer to Italian police. It is one of the two main police forces of Italy. In Hindi, one can also translate it as Italvi police. At the cost of this important information pertaining to Italian law enforcement agencies, I prefer to retain the same original Italian term in this case as well. Then, as far as the case of translating idioms and proverbs are concerned, I have not given the example in this case. Somewhere I used domesticating strategy, and somewhere the literal translation was suffice to express the same meaning. Now, some linguistic issues I would like to highlight upon, and for that, I will share this. So this thing is just to go through brief. So this is the book from which the story has been taken. This is broccoli in English, but no, in Italian it is broccoli, cappuccino, the original sound. So in English, it doesn't make a lot of difference because there The only problem is with the pronunciation. But in Hindi, if you take it from from English, the problem is that we write incorrectly. We write these terms in an incorrect manner. So that's why. Similarly, Roma, so that is Rome. Okay, this I could not change. Okay, this pronounce Ciao. So this piazza, now lira and centesimo. This foreignized. Mamma, we talked about, and nonno. In fact, in some of the Bollywood films also now this expression is used, mamma mia. So it was in there in Queen and in some other films. Yes, carabinieri. So that is Italvi police. One can translate, of course, but I retained it because it's very particular to Italy. Okay, now this Si chiamava Eunice. This is from the first story. No, the second story, La Concorrenza, the competition. Si chiamava Eunice e a me faceva pensare all'Anice. So Anice, this is the name of that girl, the daughter, Eunice, and Anice is Anicet or Anicet. So if now it was difficult to understand whether Moravia referred to Anicet or Anicet, because it has two meanings. So Anicet is like somp, or Anicet is a liquor. So I chose to use somp, but then what I realized is now if you translate this in Hindi, it is uska naam Eunice tha aur yeh mujhe सौंफ की याद दिलाती थी और वह मुझे सौंफ की याद दिलाती थी. Now it doesn't make any relation between her name and सौंफ, that is anicet. So actually here writer is playing with the sound of these two terms, Eunice and Anice. If you know listen to it in Hindi, so this assonance is there. So here I had no other way but to retain this term Anice. उसका नाम Eunice था और यह मुझे Anice की याद दिलाती थी. वह मुझे, it should be वह मुझे Anice की याद दिलाती थी. So despite having the Hindi equivalent of this term, I had to retain this term as it is. Another occasion is Eunice says anche tu mi piaci in Italian, that is even I like you. And then Gigi responds, talking about referring about to the same story, La Concorrenza, the competition. A quelle quattro parole, and then it continues. So having listened to those four words, quattro is four. So having listened to those four words, because it's 1, 2, 3, 4. There are four words, anche tu mi piaci. But now when we translate this in Hindi, it becomes tum bhi mujhe pasand ho. Eunice tells tum bhi mujhe pasand ho. Now it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 words are there. So Gigi now can't say in translation that having listened to those 4 words. So un 5 shabdon ko sunte hi, then it follows. So it's this was the challenge that I faced. Then there are also, one has to keep in mind, because he has used a lot of colloquial terms, and also the tone varies many times. Tone and register changes. For example, this vattene. So this is like something very similar to dafa hoja. So this also I did, and now more or less I have talked about this. Just the conclusion. Okay.
You're done?
Yes, ma'am. Just conclusion. So translation is a very complex process of recreation, and that is evident in some of the examples that I have cited from the 2 short stories of Alberto Moravia in this paper. How English plays as intermediary in translation directly from Italian to Hindi, and different compromises were also made in order to make a dialogue happen between Italian and Hindi, have been witnessed. After all, this dialogue is unquestionably intercultural, and therefore the idea of retaining terms filled with cultural nuances of Italy will definitely help our Hindi readers get a slice of Italian society and culture. A sensible and harmonious dialogue can take place only if we are ready to acknowledge what is different from us, In the end, I must say translated text depends a lot on the reading and reception by the translator of the source text, and also on his language and creative competence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Punya Prakash Tripati ji. He had explained us in detail the challenges he faced while translating two short stories from Italian to Hindi, and how he had to negotiate, so that, the target reader doesn't feel alienated while approaching the text. There are, I think, several questions that will come up. And now we will move on to the fourth speaker, and then we will take questions. Now, the last speaker for this session is Mr. Rohit Saha. Mr. Rohit Saha, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you're audible as well as visible. Mr. Rohit Saha is reading the paper titled The Strange Case of Translating in the Spirit of an Indian English Novel, Daisy Rockwell, translating Gitanjali Shree's Wraith Samadhi. And Mr. Saha is an independent scholar from the University of North Bengal. So here, over to you, Mr. Saha, please.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Greetings to everyone. So my paper is titled The Strange Case of Translating in the Spirit of an Indian English Novel, Daisy Rockwell translating Gitanjali Shree's Wraith Samadhi. So I will now like to read from my paper. The basic problem in writing in English for a non-native English writer is that one has to convey in a language not one's own, the spirit that is one's own. A problem every translator too will face to admitting while translating a work that has not been written in their own native language. Most writers in India, whether they choose to write in English or any other regional languages, by virtue of being bilingually educated, have their own rhythm of using words of both English and their native language simultaneously. Thus, while translating a regional Indian language novel in English, the translator has to deal with non-English speaking people in non-English speaking contexts and has to overcome the difficulty of conveying through English a vast range of expression and observations whose natural vehicle is an Indian language. The choices that a translator has to make are not too different from the choices an Indian English novelist has to make, because the literal translation can often go against the grain of both the language concerned. Just like Brajkosru notes Raja Rao's uses of long sentences and complex uses of noun and verb phrases, as Rao tried to cope with the natural rhythm of Kannada language, while translating Wraith Samadhi, Daisy Rockwell uses sound translations to match Gitanjali Shree's interesting choice of phrases and wordplays. Using sounds in writing requires skill and an unconventional style, a willingness, indeed a boldness to innovate and discover new terrains of writing. Gitanjali Shree, a prolific Hindi writer, values dhani in her latest novel Wraith Samadhi, published in 2019, an exquisite piece of literary writing. The original novel in Hindi showed off Sree's crafting a beautiful language to express even things which are tough to convey in writing. As we know, translation practitioners are actually careful about sound effects to find out whether it is accidental or intentional, or to judge the possibility of transferring it into another code. In Tomb of Sand, translator Daisy Rockwell prefers sound, that is dhani, over dogmatic grammarian consideration. For instance, this paragraph, quick to draw requires quick-wittedness, not the sort of dim-wittedness that goes about stumbling and losing balance at bells and whistles. Here, she coins two new words by mixing other words. Amit Chaudhuri writes on the use of chutnification of language post the Rushdie era, and I quote, Indian is a hybrid identity. The language of the post-colonial too must be hybrid, with a scattering of untranslated Indian words and phrases and odd sentence constructions. What is perceived to be, or even constructed as, standard English is seen to be linked to an alien sensibility and to the verbal traditions of colonialism, and perhaps less educate to this hybrid multilingual nature of post-colonial Indian consciousness, end quote. Since there is a difference between spoken Hindi and literary Hindi, fiction written with a lot of linguistic innovations and non-linearity in sentences demand deep and close reading. As a translator, Rockwell does precisely that, and the result is very evident. In Tomb of Sand, Rockwell tried to think as Gitanjali Sri would think, as Meenakshi Mukherjee's comments comes to my mind. Quote, through the skillful use of the English language, one must delineate people whose actions, behaviors, and responses are shaped by a language different from English. One of the subtlest ways, indeed, in which the multilingual imagination enters an Indian text has to do with the use of English words, not muted or appropriated, and subverted for the post-colonial's own end. The current dogma has it, but estranging in their ordinary and still forms. Yet this is a practice whose import has been insufficiently acknowledged or studied. Similarly, Daisy Rockwell, while translating Red Samadhi, makes no overt attempts to appropriate or subvert the language, because the writer's work she is translating is always fluent in English, just like many other Indian novelists are. And the hybridization of the language is natural in their living and writing. It makes for an intriguing research to unveil Daisy Rockwell's difficult attempt to capture the true linguistic hybridity of such a milieu through her translation, something that has been a nagging concern for Indian English novelists for decades, as the use of translation for both the non-native translator and bilingual Indian inhabits the space of language itself, allowing them to create a space for themselves in between Anglo-American English and Indian culture. Red Samadhi, as we all know, is Gitanjali Sri's fifth novel, and those who are familiar with her work would find some common elements in her writing. Non-linear sentences, intellectually stimulating conversations. This style, where non-linear sentences set a tone of conversations prefiguring context and perspectives, is something confusing, but most of the time, it is deeply engaging. To translate a work like Red Samadhi, which even those whose first language is Hindi would find tough to grapple with, would require skill and literary dexterity on the part of the translator. Oftentimes, a complaint is heard that translators simply choose an interpretive style and try to simplify narratives, in effect intruding upon their work. Sometimes a translator can remove some parts of a novel and sanitize it to make it politically correct to attract more readers. Such renditions raise valid and complex questions about the dilemmas inherent in the project of translation. Daisy Rockwell, an American translator of South Asian literature, renders Red Samadhi into English, staying as far as possible true to the intricacies of Sri style and densities. In Tomb of Sand, there are very few instances of sentences condensed unless it was extremely necessary. Translation is an art, and innovations are a part of such a project, and this is palpable in Tomb of Sand, which interestingly is not the exact translation of its Hindi title, a title that the original author even did not like. With Tomb of Sand, the most loaded word was samadhi, which is in the title itself. Samadhi can mean a tons of things. You can ask the question, how can the tomb be made of a sand? It's the kind of thing which makes you open a book. Writing a
just
title.
Interrupt a minute. I think there is some background noise coming. Somebody has to, I think, Dr. N. Osha. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, please go on.
Yeah, thank you. Writing a title is a different exercise than writing for an audience. You want people to feel welcome and intrigued. Rockwell puts an actual definition of samadhi just at the beginning of the book after the title page. Within the book, there is an extensive discussion of samadhi, During one of those passages where she gets into the depth of it, she actually slowly teaches the word to the reader. She starts out using only English. Red Samadhi is like if you imagine someone meditating in a desert and they become totally covered in sand. That's the image Gitanjali Sri was going for. But how could you say that in such few words? Tomb of Sand takes you to the point where you want to know what it means. It is next to impossible to find exact words to render it faithfully into this title in English, but it conveys the essence. Rockwell believes, and I quote, one should not view translation as an imperfect representation of the superior and unattainable original. A translation is an interpretation, a refraction, a reworking, and as such, it contains something old, but also something that is something extremely new. In Tomb of Sand, Rockwell tried to think as she should. And in doing so, she says, what is a translator to do with a text that is focused on its own linguicity? I have striven throughout my translation to recreate the text as an English dhani of Hindi, seeking out wordplays, echoes, etymologies, and coinages that feel Hindish. I have also included many fragments of poetry, prayer, prose, and songs in the original language alongside their English renderings, and even the occasional fragment of the original that was too good to leave behind. Readers who are not familiar with the South Asian linguistic landscape will find the text packed with words and phrases from Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, Sanskrit. What they may not realize is that the original text was similarly packed with English. Now I will try to illustrate my point, and I will read out two paragraphs, both side by side from Hindi and English version of the book, to show the reverberation, the dhwani that the author and translator duo tries to achieve. The most successful one being, and the Hindi translation, Hindi version reads, "Nahi amma nahi, बच्चे हथ करने लगे, बाहर देखो धूप खिली है, उठो उठाओ छड़ी टंगी है, चूड़ा खाओ मटर पड़ी है, पेट बड़ा है राई पकाओ." No, no, I won't get up. No, I won't rise now. No, rise now. No, rise no. Now rise new. Now I will rise anew. You can clearly see that Rockwell used no for nahi and no, which has N-Y-O-O-O for nai. And another example, such example would be, nahi nahi, मैं नहीं उठूंगी, अब तो 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 मैं नहीं ही उठूंगी. So you can see that some attempts can be failed and some are much more successful. Interestingly, a word Reebok finds mentioned no less than 26 times. Reebok isn't identified as a brand here, but a signifier that engenders relational patterns in the family. No sooner than daughter-in-law Bahu dons Reebok, she sets on long walks, learns yoga. Reebok here epitomizes her freedom. That's the reason for the bigger size of the novel. She has also attempted to remove complexities for the English translation reader, made it simpler without sanitizing its innovativeness. Since there is a difference between spoken Hindi and literary Hindi, which is quite evident. We all know that Edward Lear's poem, The Cumberbatch and Indian Poem, pokes fun at gratuitous use of culturally specific foreign or Hindustani words to mark a piece of literature as Indian themed. What makes it funny is that the fact that none of the words are properly used, but are simply thrown in for atmospheric effect. They are what make it an Indian poem and not an English poem. I would like to use the word cultural or the term cultural marking to describe the distinct stylistic that I see as a central to the contemporary mode of writing in Indian English fiction. I identify as having the quality of translation. Many contemporary works of Indian English literature in English adhere to a particular style in which cultural marking suggests the sensation of translation. My intention throughout is not to suggest that English is a foreign, non-Indian, unnatural medium in which to write on Indian themes, but rather that contemporary Indian writing in English has developed a particular stylistic aesthetic that is evocative of translation. The description of actual characters in Indian English writing are often so culturally marked by cliched subject and tropes, emblematic for their Indianness or their South Asianness, as to put each character in danger of becoming a symbol for India or at least representative of the subcontinent. We can see many passages which imbues an interior space with the weight of Indianness it could possibly contain. Few South Asian English novel has imbued with cultural marking as the pseudo-omnistically narrated blockbusters of Rushdie, but now translation of Indian language novels are following the same suit, shying away from a posh Victorian English translation that was earlier used to happen for works like Tamas, which led to an absolutely catastrophe in terms of the spirit of the original. Rushdie and his contemporaries created relentless atmospheres of hyperrealism. All of these passages I have discussed come from early chapters, usually from the first few pages of the novels they belong from. As opening descriptive passages, they usually frame the narrative and give the reader a taste of what to expect from the novel. I would not claim that any of these books are only about Indianness, or that their descriptive passages are invariably used for cultural marking purposes alone. Yet, in such key descriptive movements, the anthropomorphizing of typically Indian features of home and landscape and the regular use of Indian terms mark the narrative as Indian, and the cultural marking literally take a life of their own. They are, after a fashion, characters, and like an animated moving picture, they introduce an atmosphere of hyper-reality, hyper-Indianness into the whole of such work. Beyond the animation and hyperrealism of the description, we also find the particular uses of Indian and South Asian words. The aesthetic style by which English acts as a foreign gauge and produces resonance with the subject matter induces many authors to use terms drawn from Indian languages to describe certain common household objects. Tabish Kher, in his recent book Babu Fictions, has discussed how language is created in Indian English fiction to sound Indian, causing characters who would probably speak grammatically correct English or Hindi or other languages, or even code switch in a relatively grammatically correct fashion, to speak an amusing sort of pidgin English laced with Indian words. Though such effects are created in an effort to capture the polyglossic linguistic landscape of South Asia, they are an artificial construct. As Kher points out, such writing does not bring the spoken word of the streets and into printed page. That was also the similar kind of criticism Anita Desai had for Rushdie's work. Since the spoken word on the street is neither English nor comically ungrammatical to the degree found in Indian English writing, the artificiality of subcontinental polyglossia represented through Indianified English has spilled over into cinematic language as well. In a medium where subtitling removes the necessity of creating artificial pidgins, such as what some authors feel are necessitated by the written word, some movies are now being made almost entirely in English through set in India. This is a trait which is also very emblematic of the book we are discussing today, since there are passages in both Hindi original and English translation which showcases such subcontinental polyglossia through Indianified English, since the reverberation of the words and the musicality of the prose has been consistent theme throughout the novel. Such minor grammatical concerns don't stick out like a sore thumb while reading. Gitanjali Sri's prose style is very experimental and idiosyncratic, and there are sections that are not plot related but just poetic. There are so much wordplay. Gitanjali Sri wanted Rockwell to recreate it in English, not to take her literally, but to play, as she put it, because sometimes her writing is very vague and impressionistic, tough to pin down. Even if I make it vague and impressionistic, there is a passage where she compares the human brain to a jalebi. And while translating, Daisy tried to make the passage sound breezy and fun rather than going for the accuracy. Because ultimately, translation is not only about accuracy. Word by word accuracy is only one factor of the equation, and accuracy of feeling and aesthetic experience is also important. Sometimes you have to end up slightly changing a semantic meaning just to get the feeling right. So you can't obsess too much about whether or not it is wrong. The novel itself contains a nice swipe at the Anglo-centric view of general knowledge, as well as reference to the challenges of translation. And Rockwell is to be commended for a work that manages to replace but not replicate the original wordplay with equally inventive English, and is such a joy to read. For a translator, as we all know, that the context is everything. Literary translation has so much to do with cultural marking. Translators have to know absolutely everything about the environment of the story. They have to be able to envision a setting in 3D. They must know the history of and nuances of the words. They need to be able to pick up literary and cultural allusion. Because the original Hindi version of this book was known for its exuberant wordplay, this is where the translator's careful attention to the spirit and energy clearly shines. Onomatopoeia is liberally employed and generally transferable, but the puns, layered meanings, alliterations possible in one language cannot be reproduced directly. The author and her translator establish a good rapport that openly encourages wordplay in the target language, and the result is work that embodies mood and emotion so effortlessly that even the smallest moments seem charged with life's joys and sorrows, as in the passage I am going to read to conclude my paper. And I quote, "No one noticed when the leaves changed the season of the heart yet again. When the monsoon was at its peak, the leaves grew fat, hanging heavy on the trees. They hung, dripping sadness, even when they are quiet, they hung heavy. There's beauty in their fullness. But there's a core of grief, dark and deep. The raga of grief is slow tempo, extremely slow, a despondent alap, a prelude, or is it a bilap, a lamentation? In English, we find a great deal of such cultural marking, producing a stylistic aesthetic of translation in which the linguistic medium of narrator is used to evoke a sense of difficulty in presenting Indian themes and subjects. The examination of texts written in Hindi and Urdu, now translated in English, reveals an alternate possibility, that cultural specificity and context are not lost in the process of translation into English, because they are integral to the narratives of the people occupying those spaces. This is a trend that started with post-Rushdie era Indian English writing and now seeping its way into the Indian regional writing as well. So naturally, that tradition has been taken forward by translators like Daisy Rockwell in Tombs of Sand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saha. That was very interesting, and you have drawn our attention to the, the dhwani, especially, while translating Read Samadhi, that the translator has, employed. I think we have had 4 papers today, in this morning session, 2 of which dealt with the concepts of domestication and foreignization, while the translator employs while translating a foreign text to an Indian text. For example, in the case of Shakespeare's play by Habib Tanvir, and also adaptation of the play where he has kind of domesticated it for the vernacular audience. And similarly, in Punya Prakash Tripati's paper of translating 2 Italian stories, how he had to negotiate with the terms, the Italian culturally embedded terms. He had to, domesticate them, or in some cases, leave it as foreign terms for the Hindi readers. And Mr. Dhananjay's paper on discussing the problems of translating legal salutations, and he says how if we translate them to Hindi or our vernacular languages, they do not do justice to the translation, and what are the risks that is involved in translating legal terms. Rohit has drawn our attention to several aspects while translating, especially in the Indian English context. So I think now let us take questions, and then we'll see how more discussion evolves while answering the questions. So it is open for discussion now. We have around 5 to 10 minutes for taking questions. Yes, it's open for discussion now.
I have a question.
Yeah, Kokila. Yes, please go ahead.
For the first paper,
Your voice is not clear, Kokila.
Voice is not clear.
We can hardly hear you.
Am I audible now?
But it is echoing. I think you'll have
Am I
to.
audible now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I had a comment, maybe rather, for the first paper regarding the legal
No, that was
translation. Yeah.
Second
First present.
about
First.
legal.
Second? Yeah. Okay. The legal.
Yeah, this is to
the
Mr.
legal.
Dhananjay, Mr. Dhananjay Tiwari. Yes.
I was wondering, in his presentation, he has done a very good job, and he was suggesting, maybe from Google Translate, he has taken some words, what are the possible translations of my lord and all those kind of things. But I just contacted one of my close acquaintances. She's a public prosecutor. So she's actually practicing. So I was just looking at, because these kind of terms we cannot, we as translators cannot fix them perhaps. So I was just curious enough to find. So I just found out from her. She was saying that recently there was a circular which was perhaps issued by Supreme Court or some High Court, saying that banning this kind of, or saying that, okay, please avoid this kind of terms like my lord or your lordships, because they are all are colonial terms. So instead of that, the court itself has suggested that you can use your honor or simply say sir or madam. So these are the things which are, your honor and all are maybe used in high court and maybe higher courts like Supreme Court. And that is what she was saying. And simply they address the judges as sir or madam, that's it. So in lower courts, this is a practice. This is what I just wanted to add, perhaps. And because we can't, and legal translation, and especially things which are, the transactions, or say the proceedings of the court, this has been a very big issue that it has to be, they have to conduct the proceedings in the languages, like the local languages. And perhaps it is going on. But I'm not aware. In local courts, it is happening perhaps, but I'm not very much sure that whether it is happening in higher courts also.
Yes, ma'am, you were right. And recently, Karnataka High Court has passed the order to avoid such legal terms like my lord, my lord, and your honor also. And judges simply say sir or madam. No need to say my lord, but advocates don't stop. They don't take care, because the orders are in suggestive form, not mandatory. So our lawyers use these terms, my lord, and they use excessively for pleasing the judge. And you can find the YouTube video on YouTube, the proceedings of Gujarat High Court. You can find the argument. Lawyers, it means in the argument of 5 minutes, lawyers use 50 times my lord, my lord, my lord, my lord. So for pleasing the judges.
Maybe, yeah.
So yeah, you are right. You have pointed out.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. Thank you for that comment, Kokila. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions to Dhananjay or to anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Vani, I have raised my hand.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't know.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, please,
It's
Lakshmi.
okay. So my question is the first presenter, Sanjay
Dahiya. Yes.
Yeah. It's about the translation of Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream into Hindi and Bhojpuri, I think. Yeah. Anchal.
Yeah.
I need.
Yes, ma'am. I'm here.
It's not like a question, but in your presentation, you said this play has been successfully translated. My first question is like, how do you know, or how can you say something is successfully translated? This quote and unquote success, and what is the criteria that you use to say something is successfully translated or not successfully translated? That's the one. The second one, you said it's not adapted because names have not been changed. They are retained as they are in English. So it's not an adaptation, but it is translated. But all the cultural aspects have been adapted to suit the target culture, to suit the native, target culture. So some kind of adaptation has been taken as far as the cultural component is concerned. Do you call it, like, if you don't want to call it an adaptation because names have been retained as they are, but as far as the cultural aspects are concerned, they have been replaced by their native expressions, to suit the target culture. So what do you call it? Do you call it a cultural adaptation or cultural translation of the text of the play? If you don't want to call it an adaptation, because wholesale adaptation, it is not, as you say, but all the cultural aspects have been replaced by their equivalents chosen from the target culture, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Anchal, can you just wait? Let's find out from Rama Devi and Ankur, who have also risen their hands, if there are questions related to the same. Rama, you have any question to Anchal?
No, sorry.
Okay. Ankur, I have seen Ankur also has raised his hand. Otherwise, we can go ahead with Anchal, you please go ahead with your question.
Lakshmi, if you do not mind, could you just remind me the first question that you asked?
No, first question successfully translated. You said it's successfully translated.
Yes. So the success, I think, in terms of literature, success is usually a very subjective term. I think it differs from one perspective to another. But personally, I would call a translation to be successful if the comprehensive meaning of a text has been successfully, shifted from the original, text to the cultural milieu in which it is finally shifted. So I think if the villagers were able to understand Shakespeare's play without having even probably heard of Shakespeare ever, and if they were able to enjoy Shakespeare's play, I think the play might have been considered a successful translation in that manner.
Okay, the second one. So cultural translation, is it a cultural translation? Only the cultural aspects have been replaced, but the rest, the names and all, they have been retained?
Yes. So the sentence where I said the cultural aspects have been, so it's an adaptation because the names and everything have been retained as such. So this is not my particular, comment, but it's something that has been commented by Habib Tanvir himself. So he himself called it an adaptation on the grounds that, these texts, the characters have retained their names. So I think, yes, it's personally, I feel. So the two instances where I've written that it's a translation primarily and not just an adaptation. Personally, I feel it has been, it's somewhere in the middle of the two, if you ask my personal opinion. But the opinions that I have written in paper have been by Anjum Katyal, one of the major critics of Abir Tanvir, and the writer himself.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think, this reminds me of the adaptation of Lorca's play, La Casa de Bernarda Alba, which was adapted by Govind Nihalani and is made into a movie, Rukmavati Ki Haveli. And Lorca's play have always been adapted in Indian languages, and they are quite successful, quote unquote, in those terms. So I think I do understand what Anchal is trying to say. Yeah, thank you, Anchal. I can see this is to Dhananjay. There is a comment from Uma Maheshwari, I think. She says, I don't agree with your statement that the number of women representatives in legal profession is very less, but we have to use gender neutral terms in any field. I do agree, Uma, with your comment that there are the number of women in legal professions, and the recent appointment of judges also is increasing, though it is relatively low. And we do have to use gender neutral terms in any field and also in the legal field. Dhananjay, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, ma'am. We can see the aesthetics of Supreme Court lawyers and advocate on records and judges in the Supreme Court and High Courts. So on this basis, I said the number of women representation is less. If we compare with the male law professionals.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I can see Lakshmi again raising her hand. Lakshmi, do you have any question now to
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? I think we have run over our time. It is 11:37. Are there any more interventions? Any more questions or comments? If there aren't, are we ready to conclude?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Tarakeshwar. Thank you. It was a very interesting session. These problems, as long as, Ramadevi or anybody? Okay. Now, as long, as the translation process goes on and we are going to come up with new challenges, especially, with respect to translating culture and, issues of untranslatability. Culture is also dynamic. So is also the process of translation. So thank you so much, the organizers of the seminar, the Department of Translation Studies, for this opportunity. Now I hand over to Abhijit.
Thank you for being such a great chair, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Anchal. Thank you so much. Yeah, Abhijit, is that all?
Unmute Abhijit.
Abhijit, we can, yeah, right.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So on behalf of the Department of Translation Studies, I would like to thank Professor T. Giovanni for chairing the session. Also, I thank all the presenters for sharing their knowledge with other participants. And I hope these papers would have provided the participants an insight into the current trends of research and practice in the field of translation studies. Also, I would like to thank all the participants for joining us. So our next session will start within few minutes. Please stay tuned. With this, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I begin?
Yes, please. Unmute yourself, Gayatri.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I am Gayatri, a PhD scholar from the Department of Translation Studies, EFLU. Before going into the session, there is an announcement for you all. There would be an open session at 3:30 p.m. after the plenary talk by Professor Harish Trivedi. All of you are cordially invited to be part of it and give your feedback and opinion on the deliberations of a 4-day online international seminar on translation as reconstruction, issues of self-canon, history and memory in India, organized by the Department of Translation Studies, the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, India. It is indeed a delightful moment to welcome you all for the 10th session titled Translation as a Metaphor in this final day of our 4-day seminar. This session is going to be chaired by Professor N. Ramadevi. Professor N. Ramadevi Murru is a professor of English at the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Formerly, she was the head of the Department of Indian and World Literatures and the Department of Commonwealth Literary Studies. She has also served as the Dean of the School of Literary Studies. She was also the member of the Executive Council of the English and Foreign Languages University. She is the author of the book, The Novels of V.S. Naipaul, Quest for Order and Identity, and has published several research papers in the area of modern fiction and new literatures. She has recently edited an anthology of essays, Post-Coloniality in Transition, essays on cosmopolitanism, transnationalism, and globalization. Presently, she is co-editing an anthology on feminism and capitalism. Professor Ramadevi was a visiting fellow at TUD Dresden, Germany in 2010. Her chief areas of interest are world literatures, new literatures, women's writing, modern fiction, and critical theory. I am happy to welcome our chairperson, Madam Professor N. Ramadevi, for this 10th session titled Translation as a Metaphor. Before handing over the session, I politely remind the participants to kindly mute yourself throughout the session, and the questions will be addressed after all the presentations of this session. This is a humble request for the presenters to consider the stipulated time from 15 to 20 minutes for your presentation. I would like to hand over the platform to the respected Professor, Madam N. Ramadevi, to lead the session. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you. Thank you, Gayatri. So, am I visible?
You are
Not
audible.
visible, madam.
You are not visible. You are only
Okay.
heard.
Okay. Good morning, all. Yeah, you seem to have a very interesting kind of a theme for this session, translation as metaphor, which hints at the possibility for a wide variety, a wide wide range of variety of topics and aspects chosen for presentation, be it in terms of spatial metaphors, cultural metaphors, or communicative aspects. And I see before me listed 3 presenters. So I think without wasting any time, we will move on to the presentations. I first invite Mr. Satyajit Prakash to make a presentation on a very interesting topic, understanding the Sicilian voice of Giovanni, Virga through translation. So it is something related to Sicily, which and the writer is quite an eminent one who is reputed not just in Sicily, an island which is associated, which is actually part of Italy, but this island has a a reputation and an identity of its own in cultural, linguistic, and many other aspects. So I'm happy that somebody is presenting a paper on this particular author who has a lot to contribute to the unique identity of Sicily, which, though happens to be part of Italy, has its own identity in all areas of experience. So now, Mr. Satyajit Prakash, please make your presentation.
Thank you very much, madam. Am I audible and visible to everyone?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, madam. First of all, a very good morning to all of you. First of all, I'm very thankful to the Department of Translation Studies for giving me this opportunity to present my paper here. So the topic of my presentation is the understanding Sicilian voice of Giovanni Virga through translation. The year 2022 is marked as the death centenary of Giovanni Virga, who is known as one of the most eminent and leading literary figure of Italian literature of the second half of the 19th century. He is a realist writer, best known for his depiction of Sicilian life through short stories, plays, and novels. Some of the critics have even referred to him as the greatest short story writer between Boccaccio and 20th century. He was born on September 2nd, 1840, in province of Catania in eastern coast of Sicily. His literary bravery took him to the most reputed salons of Paris, Florence, and Milan, which motivated him to stabilize a new literary movement in Italy known as Verismo. The literary term Verismo is derived from the Italian word vero, which means true or real. In Italy, Verismo is developed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and the primary exponent were two Sicilian writers, Luigi Capuana and Giovanni Virga. The movement arose in Europe after the French Revolution and reached to Capuana and Virga through the writing of Balzac and Zola. Giovanni Virga's literary works are known for the realistic representation of Sicilian peasant farmers and their daily struggles with poverty, hunger, and injustice. In 1874, with the publication of Nedda, his style of writing is shifted to a new phase. This mature style of writing is characterized by a truthful representation of lower classes in which author's voice is purposefully absent from the story. Now, in this new phase of literary career, his writing is no longer dominated by idealism, patriotism, themes of love and romanticism, but to the daily struggle for survival, the life of peasant farmers and fishermen, and focus on poverty, myth, superstition, pathetic condition of women, and marginalized class on the slopes of Mount Etna. As Anthony De Vito says, I quote, in his first realistic work, Nedda, Virga had already revolved about the struggle for living. Nedda was followed by Vita dei Campi in 1880, I Malavoglia in 1881, the Novelle Rusticane in 1883, and Per le Vie in 1883. In these stories, the characters, whether peasant of Sicily or burgher of Milan, have to face the realities of life, though the all importance of struggle varies according to Virga's interest in presenting provincial customs and characters, as in Vita dei Campi, or the rise of bourgeoisie, as in Mastro Don Gesualdo, or the miseria and hard life of the people, as in I Malavoglia and the Novelle Rusticane, unquote. In each of his stories, Virga was able to represent the daily struggle of his character, which allows the readers not only to glimpse into the real life of the characters, but also into their struggle, which might have been passed over by other authors. The regional, idiomatic, and vernacular nature of his language is one of the most important reasons to make his works masterpieces of Italian literature. He is inventive in writing, is difficult even to Italian readers. His literary pieces are full of Sicilian proverbs and idioms, local dialectal expressions, and rustic communication. No doubt, these particular elements are beauty of his masterpieces, but at the same time, it also makes challenging and daunting task for the translators to carry the actual meaning of the text into the target language. D.H. Lawrence, the most famous English translator of Giovanni Virga, said about his translation, it would need someone who could absolutely handle English in the dialect to translate him. He would be the most awfully difficult to translate. Even a competent translator sometimes may not able to carry various extraordinary qualities. In this regard, Alfred Alexander declared that, I quote, adequate translations of his main works have failed to make the impact they deserve, probably because they lose too much of their flavor and character in the process. Further translations are unlikely to remedy this, unquote. From the letter written to his French translator, it can be traced that he himself was concerned about the translation of his extraordinary style of writing. He himself said, a lack of familiarity with or proximity to the region would impede the translator's ability to give the and of the origin. With his English language translators, there are no any traces of communication, though translations done by Mary A. Craig, Alma Strattle, and Nathan Haskell Dole has been published during his span of life. D.H. Lawrence, however, expressed his desire to meet with him after starting his first translation, but unfortunately, he missed the opportunity and disappointedly said, poor old Virga went and died exactly as I was going to see him in Catania. So the interest of the Anglophone world in the reading of Giovanni Virga has tended to rise and fall over the last 130 years with the publication of new translations in various stages. In 1890, the first stage of translations came out just after the huge success of his work in Italy. After unforeseen success of Cavalleria Rusticana in 1890, almost all of his major works were translated very quickly into English. But initially, readers from English-speaking countries did not show much interest in reading Virga, including the translation of I Malavoglia and Mastro Don Gesualdo by Mary A. Craig, and selected short stories from Vita dei Campi and Novelle Rusticane by Alma Strattle in 1893, and Nathan Haskell Dole in 1896. It can be said that the real love and inclination of English readers towards Virga began during the second stage of his translations just after 1920, when D.H. Lawrence translated many of his popular literary pieces, including Mastro Don Gesualdo in 1923, Little Novels of Sicily in 1925, and Cavalleria Rusticana and Other Stories in 1928. Later, third stage of his translations started with the translation of I Malavoglia in 1950 by Eric Mosbacher. Giovanni Cecchetti has translated the selection of short stories in 1958. D.H. Lawrence's Little Novels of Sicily and Mastro Don Gesualdo were republished in the year of 1953 and 1955. After the third stage, Virgian studies has been started by many American universities for those who are doing a study of Italian language and literature. Now, for this present paper, I tried to do analysis of the English translation of the novel I Malavoglia, which is the best novel of Giovanni Virga. It was published in 1881. The novel deals with the family of a fisherman who work and live in Acitrezza, a small Sicilian village near Catania. It is the heart-wrenching story of the Malavoglia family. In the course of the time, the family suffers a series of tragedies which changes their lives forever. It is a story of futility and fatalism. It is one of his realist novel which focuses on the dangers of social and economical transformation within the Sicilian society. The family is compelled to take a gamble to better their situation by getting into debt, but unfortunately, they end up losing their ancestral house and later disintegrating by suffering a series of setbacks. The major theme of the novel is that hard work, human principle, and morality do not ensure one's progress and survival in the society. Social changes, materialism, and political pressure play a major role in determining what happens in one's life. Through the analysis of various translations of E. Malavoglia, I tried to understand how the regional elements such as dialects, idioms, and some particular cultural components, etc., have been translated by different translators. For any translator, portraying the meaning of dialect in target language is considered as one of the most difficult tasks, as finding identical meaning of a specific dialect in target language is sometimes may not be possible. Generally, translators are not very much familiar with the real characteristic of the dialect, so that they find difficulty in understanding, which leads to the mistranslation of the text in target language. No doubt it's challenging, but for the translators, there are always ways to deal with such kind of problems, as they have choice to render it with the equivalent dialect in target language or render it through the process of language standardization. By seeing the novel at the lexicon point of view, it can be observed that Virga has used rare or unusual Italian words and uncommon spelling of common Italian words, which can be the reason for the strangeness or the dialectal feel of the text for the Italian readers. But at the same time, for the translator, it becomes challenging to convey the strangeness of the text for the readers of target language. For example, Virga has used the term gruppo. One sentence I will read in Italian. For example, si sentiva un gruppo nella gola. The term gruppo is widely as an alternative of the term groppo, which means lump or knout. If the translator translates it literally without having knowledge of Sicilian expression and dialects, it will be translated as he was feeling group in the throat, which doesn't make any sense, and readers in target language will be misguided by the wrong translation. Sometimes for the translator, it may not be possible to transfer the distinctness of the dialectal term with their equivalent, but he or she must try to transfer the exact meaning as much as possible so that reader in target language can understand the meaning who are not familiar with the affiliation and significance of particular Sicilian dialect. So in the novel, Virga has left the term words like motti and antichi in italics to signal that they have taken directly from the Sicilian dialect rather than substitute them with their Italian equivalents. I will read some translations done by different translators. Master Anthony also repeated certain sayings and proverbs which he had heard from the old folks, because, as he put it, the saying of the old folks never lie, and many other wise maxims. This is a translation by Rosenthal. Then again by Landry, I will read. Padron Anthony also knew certain sayings and proverbs which he had heard the old folks, and he felt the old folks saying were tried and true. He had quite a stock of prudent saying. Padron Anthony was in the habit of using certain proverbs and saying of old times. For said he, the saying of the ancients never lie, and the otherwise souls. This is by Craig. And finally, by Mosbacher, I will read. Old Master Anthony remembered many sayings and proverbs that he had learned from his elders, because, as he said, what the old folks
I think we have lost him.
Okay, are we going to go ahead with? I think he was towards the fag end of his paper.
Gayatri, can we wait for 1 or 2 minutes? Wait and see whether he comes back.
Yes, ma'am.
Professor Ramadevi, how much time he has taken so far?
I think 8 minutes.
Okay, we'll wait for 1 or 2 minutes. And
I
if
think he was almost in his last part of his lecture, his presentation. Final point, I guess.
Otherwise, Gayatri, if you have his phone number or Taresha, try contact him.
I'm
Yeah.
trying, ma'am.
Yes, do it.
If they're connecting from the phone, if you try to call them, again, it might be a problem.
Yes.
Oh, he's come back.
Okay.
Yeah, he has come
Yes,
back.
sorry,
Yeah.
there was some Wi-Fi problem.
We'll come back.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was. Is it okay? Am I audible and visible?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So if you see the translation of Craig and Rosenthal, both have succeeded to capture the nuances of the words as they translated them wise sage and wise maxim respectively, whereas other two translated them as sensible saying and prudent saying, which shows their ignorance towards the understanding of these nuances. In Sicily, it is a common practice to give a nickname to a person. It is in their normal life customs. Also, Virga has used many nicknames of the character in the entire novel. These nicknames are generally not italicized, not translated, nor explained. If you see the name like Manja Karubbe, it refers to someone who is someone who so poor who eats only the fruit of carob tree, generally considered as forage for horses. The nickname Chingia Lenta is neither translated nor explained in the entire novel. If we see the nickname like Bastianazzo, which means a large bastion, none of the translators have translated or explained it. It is because Italian and English equivalents are so close to each other that it is reasonable to expect the reader to capture the meaning. Similarly, the nickname La Longa is given because of short stature of the character, which can be easily understood by the reader without any explanation and translation from the context. In some of the other cases, the nickname has left untranslated, but the translator has provided it in the paratext. For example, the translation of La Loca as mad woman. In two of the instances, the origin of the nicknames is spelled out by author itself. These nicknames are La Zuppida and La Campana del Legno. The origin of the nickname La Zuppida is from a Sicilian dialect, Zoppetta. This name is given to Venera's husband, lame grandfather. It is not made clear to the readers of source language as well as target language until the chapter 9th. Some of the translators not given the translation until the author explained the reason behind the nickname, whereas some of the translators like Craig and Landry translate them when it appears very first time in the novel. The origin of nickname Campana di Legno is explained by the author at the beginning of the chapter 4th. All translators have translated it as dumb bell. And finally, if we see the nickname like Piedi Papera, a different translator has treated differently with this particular nickname. Mospesker and Rosenthal did not translate it, whereas Landry has done literal translation as duck food and Craig has translated as goose food. Now, seeing the titles used before the names, it can be observed that the titles like Zio and Padron are very commonly used in Sicily to address someone. Landry has translated Zio into uncle with certain explanation. In Sicilian tradition, it doesn't necessarily denote family relationship. Neighbors are also often called as uncle or cousin in a small world of Trezza in Sicily. Craig has kept padron in Italian, but in uppercase. So in the entire novel, Virga has chosen idiomatic expressions and proverbs very carefully. He selected them carefully according to mood and personality of the character. He often set off the proverbs in quotation marks so that the reader is fully aware of their proverbial status. In the process of translation, it is also important that the translation also make clear the status of all proverbs so that reader understand that the certain expression is originated not with the speaker, but from the local folklore. Some of the proverbs used by Virga are invariably transparent as they have been transferred semantically and syntactically. For example, and Padron Anthony, to explain the miracle, used to say, showing his closest fist, a fist which looked as if it were made of walnut wood. To pull a good oar, the 5 fingers must help one another. Padron Anthony was in habit of using certain proverbs and saying of old times. For, said he saying of the ancient never lie. Without a pilot, the boat won't go. To be Pope, one must being sacristan. Be content to be what your father was, then you will be neither a knave nor an ass, and otherwise source. So during the translation of proverbs, the sound of the language should not be ignored. In the translation, the rhythmic effect of proverbs is very important. Now observing the translation of currency and measurement used, it can be seen that they have not been translated, perhaps in order to strengthen the otherness of Sicilian reality from the rest of the country. Scudi, which is a form of currency formerly used in various Italian states, has kept untranslated. Similarly, the terms like terms for the measurement like salma and once have not been translated. None of the translator expected their readers to be familiar with the wind name of Scirocco and Tramontana. These names of the wind have been translated by changing them to names of the direction from which they blow. So in this way, the regional specificity of the translation is lost. So now moving towards the conclusion. In conclusion, I can say that Giovanni Virga is known as one of the most important pillar of Italian literature. His writing undoubtedly raises the concern and voices of Sicilian land. Translation plays an important role to understand the realities of southern Italy through the writing of Virga. His literary works have been translated by prominent translators in English in various European languages over an extended period of time. Only through the process of translation, Virga's thoughts crossed the border of Italian land, but unfortunately, in Indian languages, his major works have not been translated yet. Very few of his literary works have been translated in Hindi. There is a huge possibility of translation in Indian languages. translators from Indian languages should come forward with a promise to portray his Sicilian voice in Indian languages. And this novel work will be a great tribute to him on his death centenary. With this, I complete my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening me so patiently. Thank you very much. Over to you, madam.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Satyajit, for your brilliant presentation. So that was a brilliant presentation, Mr. Satyajit Prakash. By choosing to make a presentation on Virga's translations, that is, I mean, you have actually highlighted very important things. That is, you have actually indirectly thrown light on the immense possibilities and potentials of an effective translation. So these translation, which proved to be very effective, they have actually shown that how a translator, an effective translator, can elevate the status of a regional text to that of a world literary text. So in this regard, these translations have not only elevated the status of Virga as a Sicilian writer, but also, firstly, he was accepted by Italian writers as one of them. And then his status grew up to that of a world literary writer, because writers like D.H. Lawrence have chosen to translate him into English. So thus he was made accessible to the world. That is mainly because of the linguistic nuances and the cultural uniqueness and other sociological aspects which have been preserved in these translations of Mr. Virga's works. So it is actually a kind of a window that you have introduced in this actually presentation. It acts as a kind of a window to the rest of the world. That is how, through which the world can look at and appreciate the contribution of Mr. Giovanni Virga. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Shall we move on to the next presenter? So the next presenter is Mr. Sajid Rashid. He is going to make a presentation on an interesting genealogical topic, history of translation studies in the Arabic language from the Middle East to India. So it is directly related to the Indian context and going to focus on the kind of rapport that exists between Arabic language and Indian subcontinent. Over to you, Mr. Sajid.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Madam, sorry to interrupt you, ma'am.
Yes.
Dr. Ankur Konar is there. He was supposed to present first, ma'am.
I don't have his details, please, in the one which you circulated to me.
Hello. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yes.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah. Please go on.
Okay. Thank you, madam, for giving me this opportunity to read and to participate in this seminar. My topic is history of translation studies in Arabic language from Middle East to India. I have been in this field of translation for the last 15 years. I'm teaching translation in university for the last 5 years. And I worked also in Saudi Arabia, Dubai and Qatar and Oman as a teacher and a translator. And I have also written two books in translation. I have translated a famous book from 10th century, As-Salabi, from Arabic to English. I will not go very deep, but I will read some of the important points that will help me, to understand, to make, clear that how translation and how Indian scholars, Arabic, scholars, but I think now I'm audible. Let me read. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah, please go on.
Okay, okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Translation as a means of communication, it helps people to communicate, exchange knowledge, benefit from research written in foreign language. The development of science and technology in this modern age becomes an integral part of translation activity, because most of the information, or we can say the important information, is written in different famous languages, such as science, medicine, religion, and literature. Therefore, if there is no translation, then it will be very difficult for people to understand the content. For that reason, translation is very important in order to convey the real meaning and same information written in the source language. Translation from primitive times has been accepted as a substantive field of literature for communication of thought, ideas, philosophy, religious studies, and literature. We read in history books when man crossed the stages of different age, man started to live on different parts of world with an organized life. Immediately after that, he felt the need of communication that will help him to live happily with other people, and tried to find better words for their communication. This process evolved and spread over the various realms of the earth, thus gave birth to different regions and communicative skills. Athens in Greece was the first school which introduced the skill of translation in order to put forth their point of view in a philosophical way. The religion of Islam encouraged the scholars to put their efforts in the field of translation. Thus, need of translation across like anything in 2nd century of Hijrah. Expansion of knowledge was evident when the reign of power came in the hands of Abbasid period. Baitul Hikmah was the unique state, or we can say the institution in the entire Islamic world, which translated entire Greek philosophy, life science, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and geography in Arabic language. Thus, a permanent and prominent institute for translation came into existence in the history of mankind, which was considered to be the first state-sponsored institute for translation. Now, translation. I will not go to read what the meaning of translation and the import of translation and the types of translation. But I will read one of the two sentences, Arabic as a Semitic language. Arabic belongs to the Semitic language family, which is a part of a wider Hemito-Semitic family. Semitic language is having a recorded of history thousands of years back. In the pre-Islamic period, Arabs used to travel and move from one area to another during winter and summer for trading. They used the Arabic language in every day-to-day context, and used a variety of languages such as Syriac and Aramaic. They had to learn those languages also in order to communicate with other people during their voyages. At that time, there was no Arabic written system. But Dr. Badri says that the Arabic language is a language of all times and is a language of living science, natural science, and modern humanities. A history of translation in Arab, or we can say in Arabic or in Arabia. Scholars believed that the translation began with a gesture communication, and people reached through the different languages before knowing the written style. The study of civilization shows that the translation studies came into consideration in the valley of Rafidin and Nile in Egypt. The oldest translation was found from Sumerian language to Akkadian language, which they left in the reign of King Sargon, was 3,000 years BC. And we have a different type of civilization as Babylonian civilization laid the foundation of translation. And Dr. Izzuddin Muhammad Najib expressed in his book that the rulers of Syria used to write letters in which they are asking for money or help. As we had evidence that the agreement was written between King II Ramses Pharaoh of Egypt and King Hysene Serio 43 to 106 BC, Roman orator. He was a Roman orator, was the first who set the rules for translation. Arab nation didn't live in darkness. They were aware about their neighbors from Persia, Rome, and established trade and cultural relations with them. They influenced them and vice versa. By this reason, they influenced linguistic patterns and diction on domestic and social sphere. Great pyramids of Egypt are the live instance in the history of anthropology, which leads to the essence of taste for beauty in the field of reciprocal nature for communication and translation of ideas in the pluralistic manner. This symbolic phenomena of intra-community and multi-community transmission of views and ideas laid the foundation of interpretation translation in primitive times. Now, translation in Islam and translation. The birth of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the 7th century was the turning point. Arabs gone through prophet's action and words very seriously. This period was one of the most important time of Arabs. Teachings of Prophet ﷺ changed the political, cultural, and linguistic map of their area. Translation in the Arab world dated back to the era of the Syrians, in which an extensive heritage belonging to the era of paganism was translated into Arabic. Schools were established by the Prophet ﷺ in Medina Munawwara very soon after his arrival. Policy was to send teachers and preachers to different areas outside Medina. The letters of the Prophet ﷺ, or peace be upon him, to the king beyond Arabia late in the 6th Hijri, on his return from Hudaybiyah, the Prophet ﷺ decided to send messages to the kings beyond Arabia, calling them to Islam in order to authenticate the credentials of his envoys. A silver seal was made in which were graven the words, Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. This pushed the Prophet to look for translators to translate the messages from Arabic into other languages and encourage Muslims to learn other languages as well. One of the Prophet's translators was Zaid bin Sabit radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who played a vital role in translating the letters of Prophet ﷺ from Arabic into other languages and vice versa. Later on, due to the expansion of the Islamic Empire, the new empire at an interaction of Eastern and Western civilizations and brought together the most sophisticated cultural traditions of the period: Greek, Indians, Persian, and Egyptian. As a result, there was a shift in Arabic from being a mainly spoken language to a written and spoken lingua franca of a vast civilization comprising many ethnic and linguistic groups. Hazrat Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, may God please with him, was the first Khalifa or Caliph ordered to translate state documents from Persian countries and laid a foundation to keep the record and registration of army men and their salaries and transfer documents and letters. And then a translation in the Umayyad period. After the Holy Prophet had passed away, Muslims had taken the responsibility to teach and convey the Islamic message to different parts of Asia and Europe. The Umayyad rulers put a lot of efforts to lay down foundation of the Islamic Empire. The first translation carried out during this period were from Greek and Coptic into Arabic. Now the translation is in Abbasid period. This period is considered the golden age of translation. The tradition of Caliph sponsorship of book writing that was initiated by the Umayyad caliphs was continued under the Abbasid period. Khalifa, or we can say Caliph al-Mansur, who laid the foundation of city of Baghdad, improved translation techniques, which Caliph al-Mamun opened a small translation agency, the House of Wisdom, that we call in English Baitul, in Arabic Baitul Hikmah, was the largest translation institute of the time. At the orders of some of the caliphs, books were composed mostly by non-Arabs that were to acquaint to the intellectual elite with the achievements of other cultures. In those days, the mostly translated Greek books were Greek philosophy, Indian science, and Persian literature. The learned scholars of his court translated different types of books on different subjects. Some of them were Aristotle, Ptolemy, Almagest, and the treatises of geography were also translated into Arabic. Suleiman at-Tazi was the first description of he was the first translator who translated Chinese and Indians, and was at different rules, or we can say methodology of translation in Arabic from different languages. Other translators also, Sabit bin Qurra translated Ptolemy's geography into Arabic, Al-Biruni and other scholars, also Ibn Mukaffa. He also translated Kalila wa Jimna. There's a long list of Arab translators who translated different books on different topics from different countries. And now this is a very important now this topic what now I'm going to read, a translation after 1798. This aim of translation starts again with the great objectives in the Arab when Napoleons entered in Arab in 1798. In this period, printing press has been established. With the help of press, lot of books came into existence and reached to the common man and scholars. The written text of those books opened the eyes of Arab scholars, and they thought that they have a great books of literature and history, especially geography, medicine. They should be translated, and the work of translation started, and hundreds of books on different subjects have been translated. In 18th century, Arab scholars established academics and schools of translation. One of them, Madrasatu Al-Sina, in which 2,000 books have been translated into Arabic. The head of the school was Rifa Big Tahtawi. Establishment of theater, military academies, learning centers, and translation institutions in the Egypt after the invasion of Napoleon Bonaparte in 1798, and deputation of Arab scholars to France and vice versa established a permanent entity of translation interpretations in the first quarter of the first century. Then after that, we know the relation between the India and the Gulf. We have very deep roots with the Gulf countries. The history, the books, and then the present situation, and in the future also, we believe that this relation will go very deep and deep and deep. And then after that, when we talk about the Indian scholars, Arab scholars who translated from Sanskrit, from Hindi, and other, we can say, the local languages from Arabic, and vice versa. History of translation in India has achieved a tremendous success in the period of Mughal. Jalaluddin Akbar, third king of Mughal Empire, was the first who ordered to translate most important books from Arabic and Sanskrit into Persian. The Akbar period was popularly known as the Renaissance of Persian literature. Books were translated in this period. Wafiatul Ayam has written by Ibn Khalikan. He translated and he compiled this book. And if we go through the book, we found that the long list of names who contributed a lot in the field of literature and other sciences also. And it has been translated by Badayuni called Baharul Asma. His full name was Sheikh Abdul Qadir Badayuni. He translated it from Arabic. And then Mujmul Buldan, he was a great scholar, historian from 10th century. His name was Yaqut al-Hamawi. And this book also has been translated by Sheikh Abdul Qadir Badayuni. And Hayatul Haywan also has been, this book is in Arabic, written by Dumairi, and has been translated by Abdul Fazl bin Mubarak. And then Tahriq al-Hukama by Shahar Zuri, and translated by Sheikh Maqsood Ali. And after that, he named this book Nuzhatul Arwa wa Nuzhatul Afra. There's also books, some of the books, for example, Maya and Singhasan Batisi were translated by Mullah Abdul Qadir Badayuni into Persian. And also Panchtantra was translated into Persian by Faizi. And Raj Tarangini was translated by Maulana Shah Mahmud Shahabadi. These are the books which has been translated from Arabic, from Sanskrit to Arabic language. Other personalities, Indian personalities, great scholars, we can say, who contributed a lot in the field of translation, among them Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, Sheikh Ali al-Muttaqi, Sheikh Muhammad Tahir Tibtani, Sheikh Abdul Haq Dahlavi, Sheikh Muhammad Ali Thanvi, and Sheikh Abdul Nabi, and Ghulam Ali Azad al-Balgharami. Indian Muslim scholars translated religious books into the native languages to make things easily available for general people, common people, layman people. The first translation in Indian subcontinent was done by Shah Waliullah into Persian language. It is a fact that the great thinker and reformer of the 18th century, Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, is a high-ranking personality who understood the necessities of his time well, the importance of the translation. And such a renewal in all sciences and arts, which is indispensable.
Mr. Rashid, could you please
yes, ma'am. Only 3 or 4 lines, but
yeah,
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, please.
And then after Although he has played a major role in creating awareness in all sciences and arts. But in particular, he is second to note in popularizing the teachings of Quran al-Hakim, because he translated the Quran from Arabic into this Indian language, or the Persian also, and formulating the basic principles and rules for translation and in compilation of tafsir also. Now I will leave some of the lines. I will jump on the importance of translation according to this Shah Waliullah Dahlvi. Shah Waliullah was a great Muslim reformist of 18th century in India. He was the first Indian scholar who came forward and put all his efforts to translate Arabic content into the Persian language. From his point of view, correct translation is of great importance at a time when scholars around the world were embroiled in a debate over whether it is permissible to translate the Quran into another language or not. This was a burning issue at that time, whether we should translate the religious books, especially the Quran, or in other languages or not, whether it is permissible or not. Shah Sahab has emphasized that if the common language of this people is different from the language of science and the arts, then it is very important that such science be translated into the language of the common people. Shah Sahib's point of view is that the correct understanding of science and art is not possible for the common people unless these sciences and arts are translated into their native language. So I skipped many lines, so because of the limited time, hope inshallah next time inshallah we will be given a chance to elaborate and to read more about this translation and the importance of translation in Arabic literature. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for your elaborate overview of Arabic literature and translations, starting from the Islamic period through Ottoman Empire and the Mughal period to the present times. It was a good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, we move on to the next presentation. May I now request Mr. Ankur Konar to make from the Sri Rash Bihari Ghosh Mahavidyalaya to make his presentation. The topic of the next presenter is Border and Beyond, Translation, Translating, and Indian Drama in English. So I hope it shall be a very enlightening presentation on Indian drama in the present translations happening right now in the scenario of Indian drama. Over to Mr. Ankur Konar.
Thank you, ma'am. Please confirm any one of the listener whether I am audible as well as visible.
Yes,
you are
audible, you are visible.
Dr. Ankur, your time is 15 minutes. Please confine yourself to 15 minutes, please.
Sure.
Thanks.
The title of my paper has already been notified by the respected chairperson. In this article, actually, I am going to present the positive aspect of translation. Though in translation studies, we have both the pros and cons, the limitations as well as many positive aspects of translation in academia we find. But in this particular paper, in my particular article, I will just focus on the absolute unifying power of translation. And particularly, I will limit my exploration in the field of Indian drama in English. First of all, let me clarify the two phases, two academic critical phrases that is sometimes taken for synonyms. For example, the two phrases, Indian drama in English and Indian English drama. These two phrases need a kind of clarification because there are certain understandable gap in these two phrases. What is Indian English drama? It's very simple. Indian English drama, the Indian author, when writing his or her drama directly into English, so this is Indian English drama. Whereas the conception of Indian drama in English, it becomes a kind of umbrella term, and it drags a sense of inclusiveness. Indian drama in English connotes all the Indian dramas written in any regional languages of India and then later translated into English, as well as all the Indian English drama. So, for example, if we want to explain or give a kind of example, Vijay Tendulkar's English translation of Vijay Tendulkar's dramas fall into the category of Indian drama in English, whereas Mahesh Dattani's plays should be bracketed in both categorization, Indian English drama as well as Indian drama in English. So, in this paper, I will focus primarily on how the field of Indian English drama, through the modes of translation, or rather through the positive aspect of translation, the unifying power of translation, has been randomly moving from this state to another state. In fact, my intention is to say that in India, there are many states which have been divided by giving them the border. Translation is actually making a kind of border breaking tendency. In West Bengal, particularly in a college where I presently teach, I teach there a drama prescribed in our syllabus, that is Vijay Tendulkar's Silence, the Court is in Session. So when I go to access or to give a test of Tendulkar's text to my students, the students who are basically Bengali, or Madam was just in the previous lecture talking about cultural translation. When we went to explain the cultural layers of Tendulkar's text, I think the explanation need not to be very much to that extent, which sometimes at certain times become critical to denote the cultural nuances as well as the social life that we lead. Tendulkar's text that captures the Marathi lifestyles, or rather we can say the west part of India. When I am teaching that text in the east part of India, translation acts as a kind of bridge. So the first generation learner of my college get an access into the world of Maharashtra through translation. Similarly, in any of the university or college located in the western part of India, that is Maharashtra or many other states as well, the students will get an access to the world of Utpal Datta or the world of Badal Shivkar, who are culturally belong to the east part of India. So my point is that due to the heterogeneous linguistic variation in India, writing in English about characters who are presumably speaking in an Indian language for audiences for whom English is a second language is not a situation conducive to a great drama. This idea has been proposed by Girish Karnad as well Vijay Tendulkar. A writer of Indian origin conceives his dramatic text in his vernacular language and then later translate it into English. As far as the lucidity and clarity are concerned, there are definitely a constructive gap between the original conception and the translation production. That is why the first step of translation sometimes produces complexities instead of simplicity, roundabout in case of linear. The situation becomes much more complicated when the play is staged in English in front of the audiences for which the English is the second language. And once again, a layer of translation occurs, and the original conception of the play and the final transportation becomes far away from each other. And that's why we find that, in fact, in Bengal, similarly also in Maharashtra, a drama in a non-native language is the most difficult form to nurture. Why? because its early struggles have not succeeded. Aurobindo's plays lived on the page and Tagore's translation lacked the vitality of the theatre. Similarly, Jasbir Jain points out that Asif Karim Boy, who wrote a large number of plays and had some of them performed, chose middle-class urban characters who were more likely to converse in English than rural or working populations. This particular observation is very valid for my presentation because I teach in such a college where English, or rather, the generation actually who came to attend the college, they are basically the first generation of learner for whom even connecting through the mother tongue sometimes become very much problematic. And to make them understand what Tendulkar's texture was actually done by through the modes of English. If we not only focus on only Tendulkar's drama, if we focus on many other Indian dramatists whose text has been translated into English, we will find that Tendulkar translated Badal Sirkar's Evam Indrajit into Marathi. Girish Karnad translated Tughlaq from Kannada to English, and Mohan Rakesh's Adhe Adhure from Hindi to English. Karnad translated Sirkar's Evam Indrajit into English, and Karnad self-translated for many a time. So interestingly, most of Tendulkar's writing are in Marathi, not in English. Yet his plays have radically been translated and successfully performed into English all over the globe. That shows the penetration of Tendulkar's concern into different languages. So at this point, let me also tell you that if you go to visit the Vijay Tendulkar's page in his website, you will find that there is a reference to Vijay Tendulkar Drama Festival in New York in October 2004. So this kind of incident marks him to be a kind of global Indian idol, not merely categorized to local Marathi theatre personality only. So this kind of recognition that Tendulkar achieved through the modes of translation is actually ensuring a kind of, we can say, there is a kind of nationalist consciousness as well, because translation in this case acts as a kind of process of establishing equivalence on lexicon, syntactic, semantic, stylistic, cultural levels of the original text. Naturally, when the original text like Gashiram Katwal is rooted in a particular socio-cultural ethos, the translated has to confront various limits of translatability arising out of conglomeration of several formal, linguistic, and cultural features of the original text. In spite of this kind of weaknesses or limitation of translation, my point is that in a village in Bardwan that is situated in West Bengal, reading or teaching Vijay Tendulkar through the modes of English translation gives you a sense that actually translation into English, not in Hindi or any other local languages. Let me tell you that ironically enough, English was the colonizer's language, but nowadays we are actually positioning the academia in such a way that a text of Tendulkar written originally in Marathi has been translated in English by a translator, and the text has been prescribed for the Bengali or any academic institution in South India, actually gives you a sense that English, ironically enough, which was actually a kind of colonizer's language, gives the Indians access to many other local cultural nuances, cultural texts, cultural textures, etc. So the number of Indian dramatists writing directly in English is very less in number. Credit goes to the rigorous process of translation that makes the conceptualization of Indian drama in English possible by establishing the names of Tendulkar, Karnad, El Kuncher as Indian theatre icon. Meenakshi Mukherjee, in her scholarly essay on translation titled Divided by Common Language, a very famous essay from our award-winning Sahitya Academy award-winning book, The Perishable Empire, maps out the positive role that translation played, in spite of its many limitations. There is no doubt about the limitations of translation, but once again, my paper tries to celebrate the positive aspect of translation, particularly of the English translation. After independence, the state-based identity has been imposed on the author. Namely, we refer to Marathi Tendulkar, Bengali Utpal Datta. That's why the authorial identity has been formed with state-centric exclusiveness rather than with nation-centric inclusiveness. Linguistic plurality of Indian culture has given birth to many separate traditional patterns within the same country. They are distinct from each other not only in linguistic expression but also in thematic variety. The lens of cultural studies will easily map out the divergent gap regarding the textualization of space-specific cultural science. In spite of dominance of Hindi, English has more accessibility as well as acceptability in office space and domestic space nowadays. Most of the bestsellers in India are written in English, not in Hindi. It would be an interesting observation to note that how many texts written in local language have been translated into Hindi and how many into English. All the races of this country have their literary output: Bengal, Maratha, Gujarat, South India, etc. Since linguistic explication is different from each other, one cannot easily access to others' literary pages. There are some creation of or formation of many borders within the country, linguistic border that I definitely trying to say, and translation works as a kind of bombarding this border and goes beyond the boundaries, basically the linguistic boundaries, and to establish the name of the translators, names of the translators like Priya Adarkar, Shanta Gokhel, Shomik Bandyopadhyay, as popular as the dramatist Tendulkar, Karnad, or Elkunchar. So, with the positive note, I end my presentation that translation bears testimony to goes beyond any kind of parochial border. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Konar. Thank you for a very interesting presentation in which you have tried to establish how the translations happening in the field of Indian drama are serving to subvert any kind of regional or parochial borders, and thus opening the borders or boundaries between two regional groups or any such parochial boundaries. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Next, we move on to the last presentation slated for this session. It is by Dr. Solomon Raju Yarlagadda.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Can you listen to me, madam?
Institute of Technology, Andhra Pradesh. So he has chosen to make his presentation on the significance of translation in interpersonal communication. So for a change, we are going to have a presentation on the communicative approach of translation. Over to you, Mr. Yarlagadda.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Good morning, madam.
Good morning. Please
Good morning to the
confine yourself to
resource
15
person.
minutes, please. We are running late. So you can take 15
yes,
minutes to complete your presentation.
Yes, ma'am. Sure. Actually, I prepared my PPT, but due to this NBA work, we are busy with that's what, ma'am. I couldn't completely prepare it, but I would like to present it orally, madam. Is it okay, madam? As the other presenters.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Is my voice is audible, madam?
Yes, your voice is audible. You can go
thank you.
ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Myself, I'm Y. Solomon Raju. I have been working in NR Institute of Technology in Andhra Pradesh, Associate Professor of English. First, I would like to thank the organizers of IFLU, Department of Translation.
You're not audible, please.
Yeah. Is it okay, madam?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
now you're audible.
I feel very happy, honored to present my paper. The topic for my presentation is the significance of translation in interpersonal communication. One of the interesting one. Here, I think all of you might know what is meant by interpersonal communication. Means we are exchanging our ideas with one person to other person. So in the translation also, how can we exchange our ideas? That is called one person to other person, or in the writing task and whatever it is. So I would like to start with this. Just I don't take much time, very little time, ma'am. The significance. However, there is no denying that humans have been talking for centuries. It is also self-evident that anytime a shared code exists, a mutual intelligibility exists. Communication is frequently hampered by linguistic and cultural differences. When communication breaks down due to linguistic problems, the translator is frequently called into mediate so that the process of communication can continue. Translation is the professional activity of recreating a text written in one language in another language so that it may be read by speakers of the second language. This means that translation as a professional activity contributes significantly to the communicative process by removing or attenuating all linguistic and cultural barriers. In Nigeria, for example, the Hausas, Yorubas, and Igbos all have a mutual suspicion of each other. Goes without saying that persons from the same language group converse better than one another. Communication between people from different language groups, on the other hand, may become stuck or inefficient now. It's important to note that when we talk about communication, we are not just talking about oral communication, like conversations between two or more people, interviews, speeches, and broadcasts. We are also talking about the exchange of ideas and information through letters, text messages, contracts, general documents of any kind, and literary works like poems, plays, and novels. When the parties involved work in a monocultural environment, communication can flow freely. However, when both parties come from different cultural backgrounds, linguistic issues can cause problems necessitating the use of a translation. Say, for example, Niraj C. Chowdhury's remark on the literary side, in addition to the names of Shakespeare and Milton, we came to know of Homer as soon as we began to read the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which we read early. Says a lot about the value of translated literatures. So writers and readers were introduced to European literatures through such beginnings. The flow of connection between English and Indian literatures impacted, they're impacted a lot. And then, which was heavily influenced by Romanticists and Neoclassicists, adherents of art for the sake of art and art for morals, Puritanism, and Imagination or symbolism. The influence.
Sir, you are muted.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes, you go on.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. We have a poor networking here. That's it. So then finally here, ma'am, what we can say that the flow of connection between English and Indian literatures impacted and responded to the latest literary activity, which was heavily influenced by Romanticists and Neoclassicists, adherent of art for the sake of art and art for morals and Puritanism and Imagism or symbolism. The influence of the King's literary activity dominated modern Indian literatures. So a study of Indian literature in the late 19th and early 20th centuries demonstrates that translation was largely responsible for its expansion. Many Indian authors might have stayed unknown outside of India if it hadn't been for translation. Without his own translation of the timeless, for example, Gitanjali, who would have known of Rabindranath Tagore, no British reader would have taken the time to learn Bengali in order to admire the Indian poet. So the encounter with English literature gave the Indian author and the reader with a new set of ideals and canons, thus creating an area for commonality of vision among the boundless variety of distinct Indian literatures. This is spoken by Sisir Kumar Das, one of the famous translator, writer in Indian literature. And through translation, Indian intellectuals were able to appreciate the beauty of Sanskrit literature, as well as Greek and Roman authors such as Homer and Virgil. Indian poets were heavily affected by British literary movements, to the point where they composed poetry that reflected the impact of those movements. So the modern literary history of India offers a unique example of the coexistence of two literatures, one foreign, English, and the other indigenous, Indian literature. So the coexistence of English and Indian literature became a characteristic of the English-educated Indian's intellectual life. His deteriorating political relationship with England, which was becoming increasingly antagonistic by the day, had no effect on the situation. So the art of translation has also translated a great amount of Indian literature into English, allowing English-speaking Indian readers to be entertained and educated. Many Indian poets have demonstrated that they are not only translating, but also creating original material. A literary translation can be made useful only when the doer understands that attempting to make a literal equation of word for word, phrase for phrase, or even a simple equation of sentences or images will not produce a good translation, because two languages have different grammar, idioms, and structural patterns. A sloppy translator may cause losses in meaning, feeling, and effect in his work. A good translation gives the sense of to the reader that he is reading an original work rather than a translation. In countries where citizens are bilingual and multicultural, the importance and volume of translation grows. India, Canada, and United States of America and other countries may be included. As a result, several Western universities have recognized the existence of two or more languages, and as a result have instituted translation studies. And later, I would like to give certain implications. The translation of Bible in Indian languages. The most linguistically impactful translations have probably been those of the Bible, which were both religious and literary in nature. The compilation of dictionaries and the establishment of printing presses resulted in missionary operations and Bible translations into several Indian languages. In order to develop strategies for preaching the Gospels, missionaries studied Indian culture, philosophy, and languages. Roberto di Nobili, one of the famous writer, is an Italian, Bartholomeus Ziegenbalg, a German Protestant, and Heinrich Roth, who constructed the first Sanskrit grammar in Latin in the 17th century, were among the most notable missionaries dedicated to this goal. Everything was translated into English. William Carey, a Serampore missionary and a polyglot, I think all of you might know, created the first Western-style Kannada dictionary in 1817. With these instruments came the proliferation of local language journals, periodicals, and newspapers. Print media and book manufacturing grew as a result of these innovations. Peoples grew increasingly literate. This attracted a middle-class audience looking for stories and poems about people like themselves, rather than stories and poems about gods and goddesses. As a result, Indian writers soon adopted English literary styles and patterns during the 19th century. As a result, English, a language with no geographical roots in India, became one of our intellectual exchange mediums and a means of connection with the outside world. So, and moreover, British translations from the beginning onwards, we have so many translations done. And as a result, I would like to conclude, ma'am, despite the fact that our society is progressively industrializing, the majority of communications are conducted bilingually. Apart from announcements in train stations, bus terminals, and airports, all contracts, legal discussions, and trade agreements are conducted in two languages. That is called interpersonal. Literary works, films, television shows, and any other knowledge-based works are also translated into different Indian languages, particularly from L2 to L1, that is L1 to L2. Translation has always been important in India. From oral literatures to the present, the ability to translate from and into English has become critical to India's overall growth. Thank you for giving this valuable opportunity, madam. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation, Mr. Yarlagadda. Thank you for the presentation on the communicative approach to translation with a special focus on cross-cultural communication.
Yes,
so thank you all. All the papers included in this session have been very enlightening and of varied interest, focusing on different aspects of the work that is going on in the field of translation right now. So as we are already running late, let us take just 2 questions on each of the papers presented. So, do we have any questions? So we move on to the question session.
Shall I come in?
Yeah, please.
This is just a clarification.
Yes, please.
William Carey did not write the grammar of, the dictionary in Kannada. He wrote a grammar in 1817. So that is a correction that has to be made. And similarly, Nobili, he worked with Sanskrit too, but Nobili more worked with Tamil than with Sanskrit. So that actual things that Yerlagadda would take care of when he rewrites his paper.
Thank you for the clarification, Dr. Rakesh. Any questions, please?
Because there were no other questions. Shall I come in?
Hello, ma'am. This is a
Yeah,
small
please.
doubt, ma'am. I'm Solomon. Carey has actually came to India and he learned all the languages, almost Sanskrit and what we call Kannada and Hindi and all. And actually, he translated the book also, ma'am. But that is the news I got. But sir is saying he didn't write any dictionary. Even the manuscripts are also available.
No, he did not write
sir.
Dictionary of Kannada. He wrote a
Kannada, sir.
Grammar of
Sir.
Kannada in 1817.
Yes, sir. That
It's
is
called
sir,
a
yes,
grammar
yes.
of Kurnata language. He calls it as Kurnata.
Kurnata, yes, sir.
I visited his archives too. I've looked at the book myself.
Okay. Right, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And another question to the one who spoke on Arabic translation theory as such.
Yeah, that is Mr. Rashid.
That is quite interesting and informative. You could have left out things which are already available. See the beginning of translations in Egyptian tradition, and then Abbasid movement, the House of Wisdom. All these things are well documented in.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Within India, between Farsi, Arabic, that would have helped us. But it was a good thing.
Yeah,
All the things are already available to us.
So it was quite informative. And he actually introduced us to the possibilities, new possibilities for research in this area. Any more questions for other presenters, please? So shall we wind up the session?
If there are no questions, we can move.
Seems like there are no questions.
Okay. Yes, this is the final session for the paper presentation. Our sincere thanks to Professor N. Ramadevi Madam for being a chairperson of this session. Thank you very much, ma'am.
The chair would like to say a few words.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for making me part of this conference and this particular session, which had the 4 papers and focused on topics of varied interest. It was quite an enlightening session, which actually opened up certain possibilities for a kind of a collaborative work between the Department of Translation Studies and the Department of World Literatures, especially the first presentation on the Sicilian writer, Giovanni Virga. And so I cherish this experience. Thank you very much for making me part of it.
Thank you so much.
Any feedback link, madam? Any feedback link? Do we need to fill any feedback link, madam, presenters?
We will inform in the concluding session.
Yes, sir.
You'll be given the feedback in the concluding session. Do we have a valedictory?
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
We extend our gratitude to the paper presenters too for their wonderful presentations. We are grateful for the participants and the live stream viewers for their active participation and kind cooperation for the success of this session. I express my special thanks to the organizing committee, our professors and my dear friends for your kind guidance and support in all respect. Thank you very much all. Let us adjourn for the lunch and meet again at 2 o'clock for the 4th plenary session. Let me kindly remind you that there would be an open session at 3:30 p.m. after the plenary talk by Professor Harish Trivedi. We are looking forward for your feedback and opinion on the deliberations of the 4-day seminar. Once again, thank you very much all. Stay tuned.
Gayatri, madam asked whether there will be a valedictory. You could have said that way instead of valedictory, we are having an open session. One clarification was needed actually. There, I don't know whether she's there still. She has left, I believe.